All right. Jessica, are you good if we go ahead and get started?
Yes, go ahead and shut the door. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. IT person. We appreciate you.
Got it done Friday morning.
All right. All right. Well, we have almost everybody on here already. So good morning, everybody. I see Barb, Bree, Dan, Aaron, Margaret, Peyton, Sarah, Schneider, Tracy. So thanks everybody for coming and jumping on here this morning. We appreciate you just being here with us. Some of you I don't know, some of you I do. So if you don't know me, my name is Carly. I'm the children's director at Rock Church. And with me, I have Alicia Essenmacher, and I have Janine, and I also have Jessica. So with that, I just want to introduce you guys a little bit. I have a couple of their bios that I'm just going to read to you, and you're going to kind of learn more about them as the morning goes on as well. So Jessica is the executive director and founder of Growing Hope Through Love, a licensed child placing agency in Howell, Michigan. She spent the past 17 years in child welfare, providing licensing, adoption, and foster care services throughout Michigan. Jessica received both her Bachelor and Master of Social Work degrees from Eastern Michigan University, as well as a graduate certification in nonprofit management. Throughout her career, she has worked to expand her knowledge of the field and provide the best service to families and the children they serve. She has completed the following trainings from the Child Welfare Training Institute: foster care, adoptions, permanency planning facilitator, parent resources for information, development and educated trainer, foster care supervisor, and adoption supervisor. She's also completed the foster home licensing and the foster home special evaluation training through the Michigan Department of Child Welfare Licensing. Jessica completed the TBRI practitioner from Karen Institute of Child Development at Texas Christian University in 2016. Currently, Jessica resides in Pinckney, Michigan, love that area, with her husband Peter, 3 biological children. Isabel is 15, Jack is 11, and Lily is 2, and her 14-year-old niece, Grace. Her family began as a host family for homeless teens in Livingston County in 2012 and went on to become a home for supervised independent living through MDHHS 2014. Later became a licensed foster family through Family and Community Services in 2016 and transferred to Livingston County MDHHS to become the first and only emergency placement transition home. So that is Jessica, and you're going to get to know a lot about her. She's going to be talking to you guys almost the entire time. So you get to hear her beautiful voice this morning. And then Janine is also with her as well. And I have a little bit about Janine as well. She was born in New Zealand and immigrated to America when she was 21 years old. She met her husband in Michigan, and after they were married, began fostering children in 2010. After nearly 10 years of fostering, she has parented 15 children, 3 of which she has since adopted. She leads foster and adoptive parent support groups at Bethany Christian Services and at Brightmoor Christian Church, and is always eager to help struggling families. Janine is an outspoken child advocate who strongly believes that family reunification is almost always in the best interest of the child. And as such, she is the Brightmoor Ministry Lead for Safe Families for Children, a nonprofit organization devoted to helping children stay with their birth parents by offering temporary child placements and aid to parents so their children are not taken into foster care. As ministry lead at Brightmoor, Janine oversees 21 families. Janine now lives in Farmington Hills with her husband and 3 adopted children. So you get to hear a little bit from Janine too. She requested not to talk as much, so Jessica will take over. And then we also have our very own Alicia Essenmacher. She attends Rock Church and is the director of our foster and adoption ministry here. So they've been doing a really good job, her, Dan, Tracy, at kind of like launching this ministry within the last couple months. We did a diaper drive, which that was super cool. We saw little recap pictures on Facebook. That was awesome. So Alicia, do you want to say anything about that ministry at all?
Yeah, if I can have a minute or two, I would love
Go
to do
for it.
that. Yeah, so I just want to personally thank everybody for hopping on this morning. I know that this week probably hasn't gone without its fair share of challenges for all of us with it being the first week of school and virtual remote learning for a lot of us. But I just truly love how God's timing is always good. And although today might not seem ideal being a Saturday morning after a crazy week, I really think that maybe this training is just right on time when we're talking about trauma. And I think we all probably maybe have our own little bit of trauma going on with the pandemic. But we honestly couldn't be more excited to be officially launching Impact One this fall. And God put this ministry on my heart several years ago when my husband Dan and I were foster parents. And the core of Impact One is to really just impact one adoptive, foster, safe family and child at a time. And, you know, the foster care crisis in the state of Michigan and around our country is so big. But honestly, the Lord has laid on my heart that if we just focus on helping one child and one family at a time, that we really can make an impact. So I just wanted to say thank you to everybody, all the volunteers that are hopping on, and thank you to my team. None of this could be possible without my core team. And so just a huge shout out to them, and can't wait to learn more today with you, Jessica. So
Cool. Thank you, Alicia. So yeah, we actually opened this up to a few different people in the church, some foster families, some people that serve with Alicia and her team, and then also our next gen ministries at Rock Church as well. We have some volunteers hopping on as well. So we're really looking forward to today. I'm gonna pray for us really quick, and then Jessica, you can go ahead and take the lead, okay? Dear Jesus, I thank you for this day. I thank you for this team of people that just jumped on here to learn more about how we can reach kids where they are, whether they're struggling, whether they're in different situations. God, I pray that you would just help us become aware of the things that Jessica and Janine are going to be talking to us about today, Lord God. So would you just direct this meeting, Lord? Would it be in your hands, God? We love you. We thank you for this time. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, Jessica. Go for it, girl.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Jessica Girz, and I'm going to be doing your trauma training this morning. I want to first be full disclosure. This is the first time I've ever done a Zoom training. So I will say that I please ask for your grace in this, because as you can probably already tell, I've been switching screens. So I'm really kind of figuring out how to have multiple screens going on, but you only see the one that I want you to. So please, ahead of time, just let you know that I am learning as we go. I think that everybody else is as well with virtual learning with the kids and everything else. So first, let's see. When I was asked to do this training, I had thought about how we need to relearn how we are parenting our children, how we are part of the community. I think with COVID right now, it really brings it home of the fact of facing things that we never thought we would ever face in our lifetime, especially when we would hear, this is going to be our new normal when this all started. And with that being said, I remember when I first heard it, I was like, there's no way that this is going to be our new normal, but yet here we are. So really what I want to do today is kind of take the things that we had learned, whether it was how we were raised, how we were taught when we were becoming parents for the first time about children, and kind of open up our eyes a little bit about what we need to be providing for our children now. Mostly what I'm going to be speaking of is children that have had suffered trauma, more complex trauma. So specifically like abuse and neglect, that's where my background is from. But I also want to state that this is really important for all the children in families that we're going to be interacting with in the near future. We've all had to go through COVID. We've all had to isolate and learn a new normal, which has been, at least for me, it's very stressful at times. That stress is felt through our family. You know, there's the financial stresses, there's the stresses of trying to be a teacher as well as working, being in the same home with everybody. So a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about today is really going to apply to all of our community, not just the children that have gone through some really rough times. What I would also love to hear from you guys. So I know that I can't see on my screen if you guys raise your hand or have questions. But what I will say, when I'm usually doing trainings in person, I really rely on my audience interaction as well as questions, scenarios, input. And so please do me the biggest favor to chime in as much as you possibly can, because it really helps me to meet your needs of what you are wanting to learn more about and any questions that you might have. Now, I know I'd asked before we started, do we have the option of the raising of the hand?
We do. I also put in the chat, if anybody has any questions, to go ahead and type them in there. It'll give me notification and I can pop my face in here and interrupt you and ask you a question.
Okay, awesome. So can one of our participants put in a question just to make sure that it works?
Who's it gonna be?
Just maybe how your morning's going or not going.
And if
Any
you
plans
send
for the
it, if you
day?
could send it to Rock Church, if you have the option, or to panelist, that way we can see it. Someone needs more coffee, so it's working.
Okay,
And we can't give them more coffee, so that's sad. But
great. So can somebody try to raise their hand?
yeah, they can raise their hand. They just won't really be able to do anything from there.
So once they raise their hand, are you able to click on them and then they can ask the question?
No, it says talking permitted. I asked Sarah to say something, but it says talking permitted.
Okay,
So we can just use the chat feature.
gotcha. Okay. So now we got that good to go. I also want to say too is that my husband allowed my son to have 4 of his closest middle school buddies over last night for sleepover. So if you hear some ruckus in the background, that is what it is. They're supposed to be outside or in the basement, but there's a lot of them. So, all right, here we go. I'm going to move on. First, I'm going to start with this video. It's about learning and unlearning parenting. And it's kind of going into what I just talked about looking at new ways. So give me just 1 second to get the video on. And of course, let's see.
Putting aside what everybody else is doing. And
I
focusing
apologize,
on
trying to
God.
get it to full screen.
Give
1 second, I apologize.
heart for this child.
It's going to be Karen Purvis, right, Jessica?
It is, yes. I'm just trying to get it to start from the beginning. And I don't know, I
Yeah.
want a specific,
Well,
so if you can go ahead.
I'll
Yeah.
tell them about Dr. Karen Purvis real quick as you're talking. If you ever want to look up some great videos
His
about trauma, and you can do it on YouTube, Dr. Karen Purvis, Purvis. She is amazing, and this is her. Unfortunately, she passed away a few years ago. She is the one that used to do the Empowered to Connect conferences from the Texas University, and she really is the first ever person that did trainings really looking at the kids from hard places and what it looked like in their brain. Neurobiologist, I think, or neuroscientist, but she was extremely insightful to learning about how to deal with kids that just people would diagnose as bad kids or naughty kids, but they were from really hard places. And a lot of them were post-adoption, foster care, even just trauma from childhood, hospitalization, different things like that. So she was critical. And then everybody else has kind of led off from her in the last 20 years.
All right, I had it up and let's try it again. 1 second. There we go.
Jessica,
Full
we
screen.
can't see the screen. We can only see your PowerPoint. So you're going to have to share the screen of the video.
Okay.
Can you slide it on?
There, I think 1 second. I think I got it. Let's see. Can you see that?
Yep.
I spoke to quite a few parents over the years who have successfully raised wonderful children, and they'll think, I've raised these three great kids. My biological children are older now, and I want to foster or adopt. And those parents who have been wonderful parents and been very successful and joyful in their parenting bring that same skill set into parenting a child from a hard place. And very often, the parents are disappointed at the child's reaction to their parenting style. Now, they can be confident that they can parent because they know that their older kids or their biological kids have great relationships with them. So they're reinforced to keep trying the same skills with this little child that's come from a hard place. And what we see is a situation that escalates over time where parents try more and more of what they did, and the children become more and more resistant. I've actually seen situations where very loving, very wonderful parents have driven their children unwittingly into psychotic behavior because they were using more and more of what was successful in parenting their biological children. We say if you've had a dozen homegrown kiddos, if you start with a child from a hard place, you start at square one. Matter of fact, maybe before square one, because you have to unlearn what worked before, and now you have to learn new strategies. You have to know these children's brains are different. Even if they came to you at birth, 9 months in utero, their brain development was different. These children have more likely stress systems. They have more hair trigger on fight, flight, or freeze. They are fear-driven. They are sadness-driven. They are often shame-driven. Those are things we couldn't protect them from, but we have to know how to parent them through now. So I say to a parent who's been a wonderful, successful parent, remember the love you have for your children that you've parented already. Remember the success you had with those children. Remember the kind of commitment that you had with those children. All those things will serve you well. Forget many of the practices that were successful and begin to look at this child from a hard place with new eyes. One of my greatest hopes for the church is that the church can truly become the church. And as we do minister in truth to each other, we're going to have to begin to love and support and encourage each other in our own journey. We all love the verse, train up a child in the way he should go. When he's old, he'll not depart from it. The emphasis there is not on train up, but on the way that he should go. Each child being unique and different. There are a lot of societally approved parenting strategies. There are a lot of faith-based approved strategies for parenting that are not designed for the child from the hard place. And it's very difficult for a family to look at the way the next door neighbor or the friend down the street or the friend in their Sunday school class parents their child and still keep their eyes on this child that God's called us to, or this child that God's called this parent to. This is one of those places where stopping, taking a deep breath, laying down our expectations and our needs to look good with our peers or needs to look normal with our peers, and putting aside what everybody else is doing and focusing now, God, give me a heart for this child. Let me see his eyes. Let me see his heart. Let me see his need. And let me parent here with you. Now, I love the passage from Psalms where the Lord says, I'll guide you with my eye. No, don't be like the animal that has to have a bit and a bridle, but let me guide you with my eye. And I want us to be, as parents, not driven by the concepts of parenting in our culture. Everyone who does developmental research will tell you that in this decade, we are a parenting strategy and a parenting society of avoidance strategies. There's a lot of avoidant parenting strategies out there. Unfortunately, a lot of those have become sanctified within use for the church. And unfortunately, none of those takes into account the history of this child in front of me. So my prayer for any parent who feels pressured to look successful, to feel successful, to look normal or feel normal or be like everybody else. Remember, your child's history is not like everybody else. So if you can stand when your child is misbehaving, take a deep breath, look in that child's eyes and say, God, what does this behavior really mean? What does my child really need? And bring your heart present to your child. You can be successful in every situation.
Okay, so what are our thoughts on that video? I really enjoy that one in particular because obviously anything that Karen Purvis says, it just calms me hearing her voice. I have many videos of hers, and she does have the patience of a saint when you're watching her interact with children. I think when I view that video more so now with a lot of the additional stresses that we're facing, that I think that we are seeing when she speaks of how we want others to see us. And I think maybe it's kind of reaching our limit as parents, getting stressed out. And so with like the Zoom and the virtual learning, our parenting is kind of a little bit more on display than it ever has been before in a very stressful situation. Can anybody have any input or any comments about the video and how it may affect them right now?
We had somebody say, seeing the child through God's eyes makes a huge difference.
Right. And I think as we are going to go through this training, one of the big concepts that we discuss and focus on is looking at what's the need behind the child's behavior. A lot of times when we see a child misbehave, we're only focusing on the behavior itself and not what's behind the behavior. Children use their behaviors as a way to communicate their needs. And so it's the change from looking at willful disobedience in survival behaviors or communication more so. And so instead of looking at the behavior, we're going to want to be looking at what's behind the behavior. So give you an example, a lot of times, more often than not, the behavior, the need is usually attention. Children can't, and they really don't care whether it's positive or negative. If they need attention, they will do anything to get it. And a lot of times we look at that attention-seeking behaviors and we will put a child in timeout. And so when you are looking at it like that, then you're really not meeting the need of what the behavior is expressing. You're actually exasperating it. So that's just one of the examples that we're going to be talking about. And I can't see any comments or questions, so please let me know if anything comes up on that box. Okay. So inappropriate behaviors are driven by old traumas, neurological limitations, and the appropriate urge to survive. Give me 1 second. Somebody started weed whacking. So that's going to give you a thought. 1 second on this.
While she disappears, I have to say that there is not many trauma specialists that you will find if you are looking for just some advice for parenting a kid in the nursery. No, I shouldn't say parenting, but looking after a kid in the nursery or in the Sunday school class. You won't find a lot of Christian trauma-based experience or advice. So definitely, if you're looking for that, Karen Purvis is like number one. There is a few others that deal with the trauma-based and will give you great ideas, but definitely if to search up her, is she gives you a lot of good ideas about just to deal from a Christian perspective with kids from hard places.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. I had to close my windows. I'm at home like everybody else is too, so the little distractions. Okay, moving on. Okay, so trauma. First, I want to describe and explain to you what trauma is. I will say that trauma-informed, trauma-trained is becoming the new buzzword. But what I want to say is trauma can be something as like a car accident, so one instance of a trauma. But trauma can also, and what we're more focused on now, is the constant stressors that are a high level of stressors. And in particular, with children. And why we're focusing on children, it's obviously that's what I do, but also a child's brain in development is the most vulnerable. And so as a child's brain's developing, there's certain steps that need to kind of be grown on top of each other. It's like building a house. When the stressors that come in, they disrupt that development. Now, this is kind of what we're going to be talking about here, where they, as a child, their way of dealing with stressors is by relying on their caregiver, their parent. Now, the families that I deal with and the children that I deal with, those caregivers, those parents are usually unable to provide the comfort, or the parent or the caregiver is actually the cause of the stressor. An example of that would be physical abuse, sexual abuse, domestic violence. If the child's parent is an alcoholic, they just don't really know if the parent's going to be in a good mood or a bad mood. So they don't know if their needs are going to get met. Because as you will know, that every person, every family has stressors. So it's not the stressors that cause the trauma. It's the lack of the caregiver. It's the lack of that person to buffer what is going on in their environment. And children, more so than adults, rely on those caregivers, those individuals, to help them work it through. And without them, you will see that they will be feeling overwhelmed and powerless because they have no way to understand what's going on, and they have no way to kind of take apart what's happening, and are they going to be okay? Now, the next step that kind of compounds that is that then they're unable to process the difficult emotions that they're feeling because there's nobody there to help them through what's going on around them. And then when that happens, that is when the brain and the nervous system gets affected because they're going to get into this fight, flight, or freeze, where their cortisol levels, their hormones that are affected by stress, are raised, elevated. It's a survival technique. And most of us, children and adults, when we get stressed, we eventually calm down. Now, whether that's being stuck in traffic and maybe you put some classical music on or you make your way home, then your agitation or your stressor lowers and everything's okay. Now, with a child who is suffering trauma, their stressors are going up. There's no caretaker to bring them back down and make them feel safe. So they get stuck at this very heightened level of survival. Now, with that, then obviously their body feels just super hyped up, their anxiety's through the roof, and it starts affecting their development because the body cannot then focus on the growth of cognitive memory. Language is a big one because the area of the brain that's being affected by the stressors is essentially taking over everything else. Now,
We have a panelist that asked you a great question. You just answered it. So hopefully, Dan, you answered it. Dan just asked, is it true that a child's mind can get captured or stuck when the issue takes place, the trauma happens there, and they have less means to communicate? So it's exactly, hopefully, Dan, that answered it. But yeah, exactly, it gets stuck there.
Right, perfect. So I'm so glad that you asked that. And again, so even with this, when we're talking about children under the age of 2 or 3, before the communication has been developed to verbally, this is really where it kind of gets into like this even stickier area, because if a children has suffered a trauma, they cannot express their needs verbally. And so at that point, then we have to be what I call a detective and try to figure out what this child is communicating through their behaviors, right? So what happens when a child then is suffering trauma from a young age and then it's become 6, 7, or 8, is that brain actually gets stuck in that stage of when the trauma became persistent and constant, right? And so you might see an 8, 9-year-old who is acting like a 2-year-old, and you're like, what? He's 9 years old. He may be physically 9 years old, but his brain was unable to move past that 2 or 3-year-old level when that trauma began. And we really need to be sensitive of that, because when you see a 9 or 10-year-old behaving like a 2-year-old, your mind kind of gets a little like, whoa. And this is what we're going to be talking about. And the idea that we're trying to kind of wrap our brains around is looking at this in a new way, to really be sensitive and empathetic to these children and their families. Okay, next one. Okay, so
Just really quick, we had one person ask a question on trauma. Is there any worse trauma than others, physical abuse versus verbal or others?
So the act of itself for trauma, that is not really the, I would say, like, worse or not as bad. What is going to determine the effects of each trauma or any type of trauma is the fact is there somebody there to buffer the incident or help the child heal? And so we'll say, for an example here, we're like, these are the early factors that are listed, like for a TBRI. So, I know I talk more about abuse, neglect, trauma, but here's a couple examples that were brought up. And so difficult pregnancy. Now, when we're learning so much more now than we ever did in the past. So for an example for pregnancy, say a mother it was pregnant, the child is developing, and we now know that the stressors in the mom's environment do truly affect the development of the child, right? So if the mother was maybe in a domestic violence situation, homeless, maybe wasn't getting enough nutrition, or maybe she had all the protective factors in her life, she had a very healthy relationship, but maybe there was something medically that she was on bed rest, okay? The child is born, and at that point, the environment the child is in is going to assist in the brain and the development of getting back to where they need to be, to kind of catching up, okay? That would go for like difficult birth and hospitalization. So that's kind of in that same level, that the child does have the caregiver, the child does have the family and the community to support them. Now, when we're looking at the bottom 3, the abuse, neglect, and trauma, we're seeing that the effects of trauma on children with those are different and a lot worse, because the trauma is usually prolonged and it's persistent, okay? And we're not able, more often than not, to be able to intervene timely because of the respect for the biological parents' rights to their children. And so it gets exasperated. They get stuck, and the longer that they're stuck in that fight, flight, or freeze into their brain, the more disruption that it comes to the development. And the longer it will take that once we are able to come into the family to get those stressors lessened and be able to start healing that child. So we're going to go into a little bit more to kind of get into what that looks like, but that kind of answers the question, I think. Okay. Here's a quick video on the brain development.
Early trauma, in whatever form, can alter the way the brain develops and trigger changes in neurotransmitters that drive our central nervous system. Neurotransmitters are chemical messengers that tell our hearts to beat, our lungs to breathe, and our limbs to move. They also play a vital role in our moods, memory, even our ability to cope with stress. In children from hard places, key neurotransmitter systems can be altered in potentially harmful ways, causing behavior to spiral out of control.
When you finish.
And cripple the child's ability to learn and grow.
We know that if dopamine is too high or too low, we don't get good learning. I'm not tired. We don't get good memory. We don't get clear thinking. That's too hard. It is hard. It's too high or too low. We get aggression, violence, acting out, thinking disorders, mood disorders, schizophrenic-like behaviors, autistic-like behaviors. they have neurochemically their fingers in an electric socket. A child who has changes in his brain and his brain chemistry from early trauma won't just automatically heal. They need insightful, precise, skillful parenting.
May I have a hug? Oh, I love it. They need to be parented more like a toddler or even an infant in terms of how we are kind of on them all the time or with them all the time.
Research has shown that children from hard places can be developmentally less than half their chronological age. So a child who's 8 may act more like a 3 or 4-year-old. A 6-year-old may act more like a 2.5 or 3-year-old.
One of the greatest gifts that I would give a parent if I had the capacity was the compassion that comes with deep insight. If I look at my child's behavior compassionately, I still have to deal with it, but I can deal with it properly because I realize where that behavior was coming from. I have never seen a child that couldn't come to dramatic levels of healing, but we have to know how to guide them.
Okay, so again, I'm going to kind of shout out to anybody to share their thoughts or comments about that video.
I actually have like a real life example of exactly what you've been talking about.
Great.
So when my husband and I were foster parenting the child that we had in our home for almost a year, she was 9 years old. And we noticed over the first couple of months that she was really interested. I'm not going to talk so much about her behaviors, I guess, but she was really interested in things that typical toddlers would have been interested in. So she liked to play in the sand. She liked to build with blocks, play with Play-Doh, things that by the time a typical child would be, you know, around the age of 8, 9, 10 years old, they might be actually starting to like phase out of wanting to play with those things. But what we noticed was that she, you know, the age where her trauma started is exactly like she was stuck in that age range. And even when it came to not just her behaviors, but also the things that she was interested in doing, interested in playing with, interested in talking about, those types of things. So it was interesting, like as my husband and I became more trauma informed and started going to more trauma trainings and learning about that, we literally could see that going on with her. So, you know, we just created an environment then where we bought a sandbox, we bought blocks. I mean, we didn't, obviously, like when we took a child that was older in as a placement, we didn't expect to buy the, you know, like to purchase those types of things, but we just went with it. And it's just a good example of exactly what you've been talking about, not just in like only negative behaviors, but even in play-based behaviors and even social interactions. We realized too that socially, she was acted more at a younger age than what she really was. So
that is a great example. I mean, thank you for sharing, because when we're looking at that, that's where us of learning a child's history comes into play, because that's exactly what happens. They stop growing once the complex trauma begins. And then again, it's because that their brain is unable to come take in that information in their environment while they're in survival mode. And so if we have enough history about a child of when things started happening, then we were able to look and see, okay, at that point, you know, if say this 9-year-old and she's still the toddler, we would assume that's when it began, then to assist in her to work through the trauma, to kind of catch up cognitively and learning, we still have to go through all those steps that were missed during that time period. And that's really important to be able to not only understand that, but be willing to step out of maybe like your box of what a child should and should not be doing. Because truly, when you're building a house, you really need that solid foundation. And if you don't, it's going to just keep on getting blown over. So we really need to kind of keep going back and looking at it. If a child wants, to play with the sand or the blocks, then let them do so. And this, even with a lot of the cuddling, we see they need that healthy touch that they just so crave. And so just when you see a child and they're doing things that you may think is kind of out of the ordinary for their age, let's just throw that right out the window and not make that assumption with what they should or should not be doing. Yeah.
And I think in the church environment, that just means being super aware. I mean, if you're taking a group of middle schoolers on a trip somewhere, you're doing an event somewhere and you're doing something and you think you can trust 10-year-olds to stay in a line and keep together, but you notice this one kid can't do that. It's just being super aware that might not be that they're being disobedient. That might be that they are like a 5-year-old. They can't stay in a line. They've never been, they've just never learnt that. Or, sitting on a mat. If you're in the nursery and you're expecting all the kids to sit for 20 minutes while they listen to a video or something, and there's one kid that just can't because he's more like a toddler. He wants to go play and he doesn't understand why he can't go play. And it's just being super aware. And if you don't know the history, especially just being aware that it might not just be disobedience, it might be that their physical age isn't their mental age. And just to, my son used to crawl over to, not crawl, but go over to the other side when he was 3 because he didn't want to sit. And they just used to let him sit in the corner and play with something quietly. And the teacher would sit there with her back to him. And so the other kids weren't distracted because he couldn't sit. So I think it's just kind of figuring out that there are some kids that developmentally a little behind when that kind of thing stuck from their mental age and their physical age.
Right, exactly. And so one of the things, with the example of being with the kids in the nursery or in the line, when you start working with families, it's really important to kind of be observant of what's going on. And again, being like the detective of seeing so that way you can prepare for maybe certain situations that could escalate. So if there's a child that just can't stand in the line, there could be many things going on, whether it be sensory or maybe he doesn't understand how to follow direction, his memory, he may forgot that he was supposed to be in the line, his attention, maybe he saw a butterfly and then off he goes. And so if you are able to kind of get to know your kids and your families, then you're able to kind of prepare of any kind of activities that you're going to be doing so that you're meeting all the child's needs, every single individual child. And even, when you were talking about your son and how the teacher was able to have him be able to do what he needs to do, we need to be like that for every single child. We need to be so much more than one size fits all with every child that we work with. I think that we've often gotten stuck on looking at children as they should, be seen and not heard. And I know we're walking away from that. But if we really need the children to know how much they are loved, then we need to show how much we find them to be individually precious. And that is meeting every single child's needs, regardless of how inconvenient it might be for us in the moment. Okay? All right, so I'm going to not really spend too much time with this. It's just this model that I have up here, really what I want to focus on is that the route, the sequence, of healing must honor the route or sequence of development. So that's a little bit of we talked about with the blocks or with the sand, is that if when they're stuck and they miss certain areas, then everything else gets affected. So we need to go back to where that began and to heal and to learn. So when we're looking at the human brain, we're talking about wired, and we hear a lot the term rewired because through the feedback of the child's actions. So when a child is younger, they're learning how they learn is through their environment and through their caregiver. Now, if their caregiver and their environment is very toxic, then what they are learning is that they're unloved, that they're not worthy, that the world is dangerous and nobody's going to save them. This is their truths. And as heartbreaking as it is, we need to go back and reteach them how precious they are and that we are safe individuals that they can come to. And once we kind of get to that point, then we can start teaching the cognitive. You will see about the human brain as plastic throughout the lifespan. Now, this is more of a newer concept, probably within the past 8 to 10 years. When I first got in child welfare, I was taught, this was like 16 to 18 years ago, that once a child's brain was affected, they were seeing the gray matter, and that there was really nothing that we could do. Now we are learning that that is incorrect, and that actually we may not be able to go through the ideal pathways, but we are rewiring and kind of making new connections. In a way to have it understand for us is with an individual that may have had a stroke, and that part of the brain was affected. And so they will have to relearn how to talk or walk. And you're able to do so, but in a different route, because certain areas of the brain have then died and not been able to function in that center. And when we're looking at that too with a child, the parent and child attachment and relationship, that is the most important when it comes to a development and it comes to healing for a child. And again, more so in the roles that I work in, usually the caregiver is the one that's causing the trauma that's affecting the child. And so that makes it a little bit more complicated, but it also brings into why us as individuals who are coming in to help families are so important in our role. Ginny, do you have a question? Or
There was a question, but I think I just told Dan that we're going to come back to it. He was just asking for ideas to bridge the gap between a 9 and a 10-year-old playing in a toddler room, and some ideas. So I just said we're going to bring up that in just a little bit, some ideas, some useful ideas for him.
Okay, great.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so I love throwing these in here just to kind of get us back to why we are where we are. Something I read recently is about caregivers themselves, the roles that we find ourselves in. I always say that child welfare is either it's like just either you're in child welfare, into caring with children, or you're not. And what we've seen in the brains of those who have the caregiver tendencies, there's different areas in our brain that gets light up by this. And so when we need to do, and we need to be able to give every individual that's we interact with the love and the compassion that they truly deserve. Okay, so we're gonna go into the attachment cycle here. And the reason why I bring this up again is this is the most important for child development, and also what is the buffer for trauma when it comes to children in specific instances. So this is the foundation for trust, self-worth, their voice, regulation, and mental health. I'm going to put on a quick video. So I'm gonna pause my screen for a second while I get it up. Okay, one sec. Does anybody have any questions at this point while I'm pulling this video up?
Uh-oh, I leave Jessica and you're having issues.
Yeah. I'm pulling up a video really quick, but if anybody wants to share in about attachment, Ginny, I hope that you can put your 2 cents in because you're very knowledgeable about this.
Oh, yes. Yeah, attachment is an interesting effect, interesting thing to try to explain to somebody. I guess we all think that if a child likes us, they're attached to us, but we often get kids in our home that, speaking from experience, can be in your home for 2 years and they are never attached to you. Um, they can still call you Miss Janine after 2 years, even when you've adopted them. So, um, but again, it all based on this whole trust connection with you that spirals around. So we talk about a lot about connecting with children, um, not just having this very surface relationship where you feed them, you clothe them, you make sure that all their needs are met, but you're trying to reach in and connect with them in a more deeper way. And I think everything kind of comes from that. So so in the diagram here, we're talking about, their comfort, their nervous system, their everything, is so based on the fact that they're attached to somebody. And I've had kids that have just attached to one of us, where it's not my husband, or when I used to be the director of a small nursery, it would be one teacher. And then if that teacher wasn't in that room, that child would have a hard time in that room because that one child wasn't, that one parent wasn't in there, that teacher. I think it's really just making sure, especially with these kids from hard places or that have gone through trauma, and I agree with Jessica, these kids that are going through pandemic right now are going to start showing a little of this too, because once they go back to church, once they go back to school, it's going to be very hard for them to attach again because they're not used to it. They're not good at it. They haven't been doing it regularly. It's going to take a little bit of work on our parents, our teachers, to help them feel attached and help them feel connected, because they're not going to be used to doing it. It's like, when we were in the nursery, and I know that you guys, quite a few of you coming from, being in the ministry, you get that one kid that's 18 months old and they come into the nursery and they every week they scream. They do not want to be away from mom. They do not want to be away from dad. And again, that's because that's that age of attachment. They have formed a person that they love and they do not want to be away from that person. Well, that's, our kids are, especially from hard places, have lost that person. For one, they've lost mom or dad, and now they're either not going to attach to anybody, they don't know how to attach to somebody else. It's creating this very big, trying to get them to trust you so they can self-regulate. And we talk about regulation a lot. It's just a fancy word for calm down, to help them calm down and be able to make their own decisions, better decisions. I use it all the time, and parents stare at me like, you're telling a 2-year-old to regulate themselves. But we use that a lot because it just is a nicer way to say, please just stop for a minute. Let me help you calm down, and then we can move on from this. I have a 13-year-old that still cannot self-regulate because he, at the age of 3, came to us and he should have already learned to regulate. But at 3, he had never learned to regulate. So he skipped that step. So now at 13, I have to regulate him. If an adult does not regulate him that he trusts, he's not going to regulate. He's just going to keep going. So it's definitely the basis, attachment. Everything comes out of attachment. We go to an attachment specialist whenever we adopt a child because we need to create that bond really strongly with that child because we're now parent. But as a teacher, as a foster parent, as a nursery worker, it's finding that way to attach to that child so that they trust you and they can want to have good behavior. They can want to regulate with you, everything like that. Sorry, Jessica, have I talked too long?
No, you're good. No, good. I'm sure everybody would enjoy to hear not just me talking all day. So that's good.
They just like my accent. That's how I got my husband to marry me. So that's how you
great.
get it.
Yeah. So the thought of the attachment cycle and what we're learning about so much more now is that it's not just the function of being a parent, of feeding a child, giving them a roof over their head. It is so much more than that. We have learned a lot about this because when you're looking at the orphanages that were really prevalent in like Romania in like the late 80s and 90s, if you ever want to do any more research on attachment and the learning of it, that's where I would start. Where these children were being raised in these orphanages where they were never picked up, they never interacted with a human, they were fed, they were just given a bottle, but just left to themselves. And there was significant delays and severe consequences for these children because they never learned about their environment. The things that need to be triggered in the brain by the interaction that we have with newborns were never established. And so this is when you get that kind of glazed over look. So attachment is extremely important for children's development because they need to know that they're safe. They need to know that they're loved. And this begins from the moment that they are born, even really in utero, and develops at that point. Now, what we see a lot with these children that we're working with is that this was never established. For many different reasons. Maybe the parent, was a single mom with, 7 or 8 children, and she's working 2-3 jobs. And so she's providing the roof over the house, the roof over their heads. They're providing the food, but she's not providing the time to interact with her children and for the children to feel loved by her. There's also the attachment where we're looking at when there's addiction, then the parent is just really not, they might be present physically, but they're not present emotionally. Or that depending on where they're at, if they're high or if they're withdrawing, the interaction, sometimes might be very pleasant and other times might be very scary for the child. And so this is really what a child's beginnings of what they're learning and what they're worth. And so here's the next one. Go. Okay. So when we're looking at this, and it talks about, and I have a video after this slide that will give examples about the distress. So when we think about attachment and meeting the needs of a child, we think about a newborn. And so a newborn, their crying is their only way of communication for their needs. So they cry, we then meet their need, whether it's their bottle, whether they're too hot, whether they're too cold, whether they need to snuggle. And so they're learning that if I have a need, that it's going to be met. And that's kind of how it builds from that point. Now, if we are unable to meet the needs of a child, whether it's a newborn or as I get a little bit older as a toddler, then we see at the bottom here examples of how it is displayed in their behaviors, in the type of diagnosis that we're getting, mental health diagnosis. All right.
Now, I want to draw for you very briefly how we would bring this child back online. So if you think about the outline that we made based on development, think about attachment. So what am I going to do for attachment? Most important, critical feature, okay? I'm going to do a lot of the things that would have helped develop trust. One of the first things that I'm going to do, just like I said, yes, I hear your voice, I will meet your need. I'm going to find ways to say yes. I'm going to say yes. I'm going to set up situations so that I can say yes in order to earn trust. It's obviously a little harder the older the children are, but we can always gain their trust by saying yes to a need. Now, some parents will say, well, it's really just a want. Well, sometimes a want can be a need, and a need that's met can be a powerful bridge to trust. I'm going to give that child a sense of self-worth. I'm going to look into their eyes deeply when I talk to them. I'm going to touch their shoulder gently or touch near their shoulder if they seem to pull back from my touch. I'm going to tell them, like the little one, I would have said, you're so precious. I'm so amazed at how precious you are. To a big kid, I might say, hey, you're a great kid. I love to be with you. You're just a great kid. But I'm going to let them know that I know they're amazing, that there's no one in the world like them. Sometimes we even stand in front of the mirror with kids or pick up a little handheld mirror and say, look at this kid. Is that not the most amazing kid you've ever seen? I'm going to also give them a sense of self-efficacy. When I can, I'm going to let them make compromises with me. I'm going to give them choices, and I'm going to be as responsive to their needs as I possibly can. I'm going to have to work at these things, but I can take a child of any age and give them this and put them back on the trajectory that they should have had they been in a loving environment. Now, behavioral regulation, I am going to actually teach regulatory skills. We're going to teach the children deep breathing and relaxation. We're going to teach them how to hold the pressure point so they can calm themselves, or a pressure point here so they can calm themselves. There are dozens and dozens of capacities. And then mental health. I'm going to help this child understand, because many of them feel bad and feel crazy. And I'm going to let them understand, help them understand that I understand how they feel, and that we can work together to regulate, and that this feeling of badness will go away. This feeling, many of them will say, my head is spinning, or I feel crazy. I feel sad, I feel scared. We can also do things to regulate the brain chemistry, like increase the serotonin-rich foods and give them physical activity. Simply playing 20 to 30 minutes, a nice physical play, maybe outside, maybe on the inside, trampoline, a sit and spin, any kind of repetitive activity is going to drive up serotonin and bring down all the excitatory stuff that's too tough and too high on our kids. I've used this intervention that we have called trust-based relational intervention that meets the needs of body, soul, and spirit with children all over the world. I have yet to see a child, even the most difficult, even the toughest kids, I have yet to see a child whose real precious self didn't emerge. And I have yet to see a child who does not come to dramatic levels of healing.
Okay, so I want to kind of put out there a question of, if you're a child, whether it be a toddler or a little bit older, and your needs were not getting met. So say that you wanted maybe something, food, or a little oven. What behaviors could you think that this toddler would be exhibiting to try to get their needs met? Any thoughts on that? So for example, I'll give one. So a lot of the children that I work with, usually when they're trying to get their parents' interactions, and this is in, again, more higher neglectful, abusive homes, that the only way that they can get their parents' attention is really going to the most highest level of behaviors. So then it's just, they're complete. And so someone on the outside would be looking, and this behavior, I'm talking like completely out of control, through the roof. And so that's the only way that they're able to get their parents' attention. They have probably tried a million times, maybe, mom, can I have this? Or a nudge, or excuse me, many of those more desired behaviors, and they never worked. So then the child learns that the only way that they're going to get their parents' attention is to really start from way up here. And that becomes their new normal. So we would see a child that comes into care where that is their just go-to. And instead of just nicely asking for something, or in a calm voice, they go right to the top of screaming and yelling, and the behavior through the roof. And you're just like, how did we get to 100 when we missed everything before? And that is because the child has learned that is the way to get their needs met. Now, that's just one example. So does anybody else have anything to add to that? Nope. Okay.
Sorry, I can't think of one either.
Okay. Well, that's okay. So that's kind of when we're talking about those behaviors and getting their needs met, that is when I'm going to start referring to giving them their voice back. And I mean their voice, and I mean it in ways of, yes, their actual voice, but also the giving them the power to know that they're important, that they are loved, and that what they need is truly what we're going to give them, and that they deserve to get their needs met. This is something that is really difficult for a lot of children, because up to this point, they have learned that essentially it's easier to just if they didn't exist. A lot of the behaviors that they're exhibiting is survival behaviors because of the environment that they're in. And by giving a child their voice, it's showing to them that we don't need to go all the way to the top, that I will hear you when you ask for something way down here. We don't need to escalate it so far. And that is definitely a process that would be probably for me the most trying when it comes to children, because I'm not a big fan of the screaming and the yelling. And so that's by them learning to know that we hear them, that we want to know what they need and want, and we will fulfill those needs, then that lowers their need to scream and yell and cause all the ruckus. Something that we also talk about with here is when children ask for a million requests. So they just continuously ask for something, and they don't even want it. They don't even want what they're asking for. They don't even need what they're asking for. They're just asking for it. And I'm going to tell you, literally, for you to say yes. Okay. So, and this will get on this gets for me, I'm like, yes, whatever, just after the 500th request, right? This is kind of what we refer to as the yes jar. And it's these children who have never had anybody A, respond, or B, respond in a very nurturing and loving way and give them what they need, then they just can't stop themselves. So then they just ask a million questions or a million requests, and it just keeps going and going because they're like shocked, wait, what? You're hearing me, and I can have this, and this is amazing. And so that will go on, but by doing this and by going through those motions, you're then reteaching them that they are worthy of our love and that they are worthy of getting their needs met. And this could go on for months, years. It could never stop at times. But this is truly the way that we're going to teach them that we hear them, that we value them, and that we're going to meet their needs. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay.
Yeah, I have an example of that. My husband and I, when before we even started fostering, we volunteered at a boys and girls home when we lived in Kentucky. And most of the kids there were, anywhere from 10 years old on up to 18. We volunteered with several different young men, and one of them did exactly what you were just describing, would ask literally us the same few things every time we volunteered with him, which we volunteered with him. It was pretty much on a weekly basis. And one thing that I found that helped him, I think, was when he would ask these same few questions, I started repeating the question to him. So I would say, okay, let me make sure I understood you, even though it was legit the same question over and over. So I knew what he was saying, but I would just repeat it and say, so let me understand. So the next time we see you, you really want us to take you to Golden Corral. Is that what you're saying? Because that was one of the questions. He always liked to go there to eat. And when I started rephrasing his questions or just checking with him, hey, I just want to make sure I'm understanding you, he actually kind of stopped asking them. But actually what he did then, he would just ask something different. But he stopped asking that question. So I think that really just goes with what you're talking about in terms of they just want to know that they're heard, or that you're listening, that you're paying attention to them. And then the next time we would pick him up, we would say, hey, guess where we're going? Now, that doesn't always help that, because sometimes I think that makes it worse when then it's like you give them what they're asking for all the time. But he knew that we were listening to what he was saying. And when we would start asking him the questions back or start just rephrasing them and just letting him know that we heard him, I think that that kind of helped. But then he would just move on to another question. But it helped for a time.
Right. So there was a couple of things that I wanted to touch on that you had said. This is why I love the interaction, because this helps me to kind of flow my brain here. First, the fact of when he's asking all those questions and then you rephrased it back to him so that you're literally reiterating what he just said. That's super important, because that not only, because how many times as adults, as perfect parents that I know we all are in the kitchen or we're doing something and one of our kids are just a million questions or comments, and we're just nodding, saying, yeah. And we know we're not listening. We know we're not listening, right? That's an example of like in our own home of how this is, it could be, with these children. And the part about this is that the children know that we're not listening. And I know that when I was a child and my parents were doing this, which was quite a bit, then I would throw in something that I knew I couldn't have and they just said yes to, and then they came take it back. So, when I'm bringing up about like listening and giving them the voice, I know that we're, especially now more so than ever, and we're so busy. We are so busy, and we have a million things dragging us in a million different directions. And I know that we cannot give our children, each one of them, 100%, 24/7 undivided attention. I know that's impossible, but studies show that all you need to do is to give at least, now I would say more is better, but at least just 3 minutes a day each child. Now that seems so little of time, but we're talking 3 minutes of no phone, no distractions, just you and that child, you're listening, eye contact, one-on-one. But obviously we need much more than that with our kids. But if you're looking at already struggling to try to find the time to be with your child, just you and that child, 3 minutes, as studies show that's enough to begin to make a positive effect on them. Now, another thought I had about that example you were giving up about how when you met the need of that child, so say about going to the Golden Corral, I mean, who would not want to go there? And sadly, I feel like those times are over for a while, that then it gets worse. I think that was what you had said. Now, with that thought, and I'm just going to use you as an example, it doesn't, when that's kind of our go-to thought, that it gets worse, right? Like maybe that he's going to up the ante of what he's asking for. And that's what we want. What we need to do is change our mindset of saying it got worse or didn't help, to then you said yes. So he was probably like, wait, what? I get to go somewhere that I want to go and you're actually going to show up and take me and follow through? Totally foreign, totally new. Blow, like your socks off. Like, I can't believe that this is actually happening. And yeah, he might ask for like something like, higher up, like maybe like water park or Disney or something that's, unattainable. But we want them to ask that, because if we provide them what they're asking for, if they feel heard, if their needs are being met, if they feel worthy, yes, they're going to ask for something else. Now, do they need it? Probably not, but that's not the point here. They want to feel loved, and that's part of that right there, is asking for something and receiving it because they've never had it before, okay? So, if they say like, I want to go to Disney, and then maybe you can't obviously fulfill that, and they get upset, that is when it gives you the chance to connect with that child, to say, I heard that you really want to go to Disney, and of course, you want to go to Disney, but, the couple, just real quick reasons of why that can't happen, and maybe find a compromise with that child of, I know that we can't go to Disney, but I found this YouTube video of like what it looks like to be on a Disney roller coaster. Can we like do that instead? And so there's other examples. We're going to go into those examples I used right then later on in the presentation. But I'm so glad that you said that, so it gave me a chance to kind of focus in on that. Janine, do you have something to add, or is there a question on the screen?
I don't see any questions, but you know, I think a lot of times when we have kids from hard places, they do that. Like you said, they just come in and want the world. And there's lots of thoughts, you know, you're like, do they see me as like King Midas? I have all the money in the world. Do they think that, you know, I can provide this for them? Or did they have this with their parents? Because a lot of parents do overcompensate and buy a lot of stuff for their kids. And we see that in foster care a lot. But I think Jessica's just right. I think it's just more about listening to them. You can't give everything, but if you can give some yeses or some, you know, different adaptation to what they want, it's just going to start that good relationship where they're going to talk to you about everything. Because again, it's just more just opening up communication, especially those kids that have had those, you know, if you're a Sunday school teacher and a kid sees you with an awesome pen and they go, that is the best looking pen. And, you know, I've had a couple of Sunday school teachers that'll give my kid that pen and be like, you like this pen? Here, have this pen. And my kid has just been like so stoked, you know, beyond the world. Like, this teacher just gave me his pen because I thought it looked cool, you know. And it's just all about that. You just started that relationship where I want to give you something. Now, can you give me something back? Communication wise, good behavior wise. And it's not bribery. It's just opening up that I want what's best for you. You want what's best for me, kind of relationship. And in the church setting, that's all it takes, is just being able to try to say yes to things. Mm-hmm. I hate that saying, say yes to everything, but it is more just about that you heard me and you would love to give it to me if you could. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm not going to give my son video games 12 hours a day. That's not going to be a yes. But I can say, you have 2 hours a day and we'll have it 1 hour in the morning and 1 hour in the evening. You know, that's the yes I can do. So mm-hmm. It's still saying yes.
Right. And, you know, when they talk about the yes jar, and that's something, if anybody wants to look up, you can probably Google the yes jar in it. And there is some thoughts of literally having a jar of things that you will say yes to all the time. I think that the idea of the yes jar struggles for a lot of people because we feel that maybe we're like feeding into this, like, you know, behavior of just getting whatever you want.
Entitlement.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Which, if it was like maybe like one of my biological children, especially my oldest, or even my middle schooler, I would struggle with that because they have had an environment that is very enriched with love and caring, and all of their needs are being met. But when we're talking about children who've never had anything, that their needs have never been met, that they've never had toys or food or a roof over their heads, that's a different way of looking at it, because the idea that they can have something, or that they're being provided to, or someone's hearing to them, is so foreign. And that's when we're talking about the yes jar and allowing them to constantly have everything that they're asked for in, you know, context, you know, obviously not like, you know, brand new car or something. And it's because they've never been through that before. They never had that relationship. They never had their needs met. And that begins to have that connection between the caregiver and the child, that they're being heard and they're being valued, and that they can trust their caregiver to be able to be there and meet their needs. So that's kind of the thought behind that. Okay. Attachment when things go wrong. So here again, you know, I know we touched on a little bit about this. When a child's needs are not met, the world is an unsafe place. They cannot trust, they cannot self-regulate, they cannot make sense of relationship. They will not seek comfort, and they relies on self and tries to control. So this is really when we kind of go into about regulation, self-regulation, co-regulation. I think that as far as individuals and adults, one of the more difficult behaviors that we are working with children is when they are unable to regulate. And this is where I think for us, it escalates our own selves individually when children are unable to regulate. Janine, what did you referenced regulate? What was the word you said that pretty much means earlier? I can't remember if it was like get a hold of yourself or calm down or something.
Yep, calm down.
Calm down. Okay, yeah. Which is exactly it. Calm down, right? The problem was, so regulation, how as adults that we are able to kind of keep our cool. And then this is an example of, as we get older, I feel like we get calmer, right? At least for me. Where I can even remember as a young adult, I would definitely lose my cool a lot quicker. And it was harder for me to kind of get back down again. So it's a never ending learning process that individuals go through. Children, individuals, we learn how to regulate or calm down by our caregivers, okay? So if our caregivers cannot regulate themselves, which is most often those that are in a healthy environment, whether it's drugs, alcohol, domestic violence, the children are then not only not learning how to regulate, but they're picking up the behaviors of the caregivers that they're in, that they're with, which is usually extremely destructive behaviors. So the problem with that also is that then they're doing it in environments where it's a safe environment, and we kind of get blindsided as adults, like, whoa, how did this get to this point? Why is this kid completely off the hook? Well, that's because he has learned that these behaviors are acceptable, and this is how he gets his needs met. Also in his brain, and when we're talking about the stress, the cortisol levels are through the roof right now for something that might be very minor in our eyes, but for this child, they're easily triggered to kind of get to that point. And so their bodies are probably all feeling all sorts of just craziness that they cannot control because they've never learned how to self-regulate. And so the attachment here we're talking about, the child learns to regulate how. So for example, a newborn, the baby cries, they're very upset. Maybe they're hungry, you feed them and they're calm, okay? That happens millions and millions and millions of times as a newborn, as an infant. So they're very upset, they get their needs met and they calm down, okay? So it's an exercise of going up, coming down, going up, coming down, that we're then, as the caregiver, we're externally regulating that baby, okay? Now we get a little bit older where we got these toddlers, right? And they're kind of doing their own thing. They don't need us 24/7 anymore. They're wandering, and they're kind of learning this little bit of independence, getting into things, and boom, they bunk their head, right? We come in, give them a hug, we love you, you're okay, and they're calm in like, 30 seconds and back to doing exactly what hurt them in the first place, right? So then that's that co-regulating of helping them calm down. And that happens, again, millions of times. They go to toddler, they go to adolescence, they go to teens, and they get to young adults. And eventually, hopefully, ideally, they learn to self-regulate. So as adults, when we get triggered, say whether it's waking up on the wrong side of the bed, getting stuck in traffic, stubbing your toe, we can easily take those moments in which we're like, ugh, and kind of get back pretty quickly, to calmness again with ways that we learned that helps us. Now, when we're looking at children who have not had all those examples, they're unable to regulate, because regulating is something that is taught, that it's biologically, after doing it over and over and over again, then your brain learns, like you get upset, the need gets met, and you calm down. When you are not getting your needs met, when the attachment is not there with your caregiver, then the body doesn't even know how to calm down again. And that's where we get these children who their behaviors are just very explosive, and then the tantrums and are just so extreme and they're so lengthy. This is what we're talking about, is because they literally, their body cannot calm them down. And I think for us as adults and parents, this is where I feel that I kind of get in struggles, because it only takes, I'm pretty calm for a good time, but I think anybody reaches their max out point of when you're working with a child that cannot calm, like we're talking 60 minutes, an hour, 2 hours. Well, whereas adults are beginning to be like, okay, I need someone to come in and help me regulate the situation. Any thoughts or comments on that? Anybody can give me an example possibly of what this might look like? Nope. Okay. Um, so we got here again the attachment self-regulation, what I just went over about regulating by a safe adult. And so when they are not regulated, again, then we see the aggression, the violence, and the control. These are survival behaviors, because they have learned that these are the ways that essentially they have survived. And so we must come from a very caring point of that, of looking at these behaviors for what's behind them and not for what the behaviors are in itself. So again, we're talking about giving your child the voice. Give them the words and permission to ask for their needs with language, not behavior. Now, this again kind of goes into if they have the language and have the ability to verbalize what they need, and more often than not, they may not have that. So it's showing to them that we're going to meet those needs, and that their voice and what they're saying is important to us. And this is extremely important for children who have been severely neglected, because up until this point, what they have learned is that they don't exist, that they're not worthy. And I know that there was a question earlier about if there was one type of abuse or neglect that was worse than the other. Against what many people think, neglect is extremely more harmful to the child than abuse is. So neglect is essentially saying, I wish you were never here, whereas abuse is at least they're getting some sort of attention. Maybe it's not healthy or appropriate, but at least they're getting some sort of interaction with a caregiver or an individual. Whereas neglect, they don't have anything.
And I think this kind of falls into, sorry, excuse me, Jessica.
No, thank you.
Margaret asked a question. If a child cannot self-regulate, do you stay with them or leave them for some time alone? And I think that kind of falls into that leaving them. I don't know if you want to.
Absolutely. Yep. And we will touch on that a little bit further too, to talk about timeouts. Timeouts will never work with children who come from hard places. They've been in timeout their whole life, okay, essentially. So, if a child who can't regulate, if there's fear for your physical safety, if the child's triggered, then that's a different story, okay? But in regards to them like going through the roof, they need somebody there that's going to help them calm down. And that person needs to be present. That person needs to be calm, because if you're not calm, the child's not going to get calm. So if you're in a situation where this child is getting you riled up, then yes, you don't want to be there. You need someone to kind of tag into that point, and you need to kind of tag out, because you can never calm somebody down when you're not calm. It's essentially like when, like, can you calm down? Well, okay, no, because you're not calm down. But if you're able to stay calm, if you're ever be able to stay in the moment and be with that child, and that's just, even being is just sitting next to them is better than walking away. Because they're going to cry it out, and what they're going to see is you did not leave, that my behavior didn't scare you away, that you still love me even though I behaved like this. And then they're going to come and they're going to ask for a hug or some just affection in some way, some sort of acceptance. And you need to be able to give that to them. You might be able to kind of offer, like, do you need a hug right now? Do you need me to rub your back? Or do you just need me to hold your hand? And they may or may not be able to verbalize what they need, but you need to stay with them in that moment, so that they don't feel left again by one more person, if that makes sense. Okay.
I have an example of that, even with our foster placement years ago. Like, she would, when she was having hard time self-regulating, she would go upstairs to her bedroom and like would just scream. Like, and that's exactly what you're talking about, Jessica, like, where it's not just like scream, throw a tantrum for 10 minutes. It was like for hours long. But she would sit under her desk, and my husband and I, we would literally take turns going up there and sitting under the desk, like just sit beside her. She wouldn't let us touch her. She wouldn't let us, get super close, but we would just like climb under the desk and sit beside her too. And one day she finally verbalized and said, why don't you just leave? Why do you don't, I don't want you in here. And we just told her, we're like, we love you. We just want to sit by you. We just, want to be close to you. And not that it like solved all of her behaviors. It did not, but that's just a good example of that. But my husband and I, we had to take turns because it is important that you keep yourself like regulated, self-regulated. And we would just be like, okay, I'm out, you're in, like you just kind of you have to rely on other people for help in those moments too.
Right. And I think that's kind of really kind of taking ownership of what things really trigger us. Each individual has certain things that bother them and some things that don't. So an example for my family is, because we did teens first for quite a while, which for me personally, I prefer, but it seems everybody else in my family preferred the younger ones. And so I can take a lot of verbal abuse. I don't know if it's just because of my career path. So I don't, or what have you, but that doesn't bother me whatsoever, right? Now, usually that would bother other people. It really bothered my daughter, my oldest daughter, when she would hear maybe some teenage girls kind of like verbally lashing out at me. And I was just like, like whatever. And that really affected her. But what does bother me though, is door slamming. It's the startle reflex that I have never been able to learn to control. And so that it only takes one good door slam to kind of get me to a place where I don't want to be. And so in our previous house, we just had moved, but in our previous house, to solve that problem, we got really high and really thick carpeting. Okay. Now our new house has not that kind of carpeting. It is very low and not great. So right now, actually, I have carpets swatches on my floor because we are going to be replacing them because there's been a lot of door slamming now that we are all virtually learning. And I can't stand it. And so looking at that and knowing it within yourself, like, oh, that really kind of bothers me. Being human, being mindful, and kind of owning it, and then owning it even to our children. Like my kids know that. I'm just like, you slammed the door and it really bothered me. And I know that you didn't mean to do it. It shows to the children that we're with it, that we're human too, that we make mistakes too, and that we do find ourselves in places that getting that aggravated and we don't like being there. And, showing them that we can kind of go there and calm down. And so the topic of, we're talking about kind of like switching out with that. That's what's really important, that with your team, now whether it's your husband, if you're fostering, or if it's the team that's within your church, that you have that support, because you're going to find yourself where you're ready to just lose it. And you need somebody that's going to be able to tag in to the situation, because you never want a child to feel left. They've been left so many times. And so we need just to be realistic about how that could be, and knowing that you have someone else that can kind of help you out in that situation. What I will tell you, the families that I've worked with, is that these explosions, these tantrums, these screaming, and I know it seems that they go on forever. It is such a great thing when I start seeing behaviors. So when a family comes to me and they'll be like, we've had this child for 6 months, and then all of a sudden all these behaviors are coming out, and I'm like, yes. And they're like, well, lady, you're crazy. And I'm like, no, this is great. The child is beginning to trust you, so that she's working through internally her struggles, that they are coming out in behaviors, which they have to come out somehow. You don't want these children to internalize, because it just makes it worse. So when you see the behaviors, I get excited, because I'm like, good, we can work with behaviors. We need to be there present with them and be able to work through this, because they have to recycle that trauma that they've been through to relearn that they are safe in a situation that might have triggered them. And so these explosions, these tantrums, the screaming, the meltdowns that lasted for an hour, they will slowly begin to get shorter and shorter and shorter, because the child is then learning that I can feel this way, I can exhibit these behaviors, and they're processing through these internal feelings, knowing that you're still there, you still love them, it's safe. Whereas maybe when in their past at their home, if they were screaming like that, they either were, like, and I've known, I've done this as a parent, and my parents said to me, go to your room. If you're going to act like that, I just don't want to be around you. Go somewhere else. Right. And that is so hurtful to a child. where they may not be able to control that behavior. So essentially they're just then, sent off outside or their room, or worse, and please tell me if I'm not the only one, I'm sure, you want me to give you something to cry about? Because that was my father's number one line, right? So that they were met with, again, just unloving and frustrated behaviors from the adult. So when they start behaving like this, I know it seems really frustrating and disruptive, but I get super excited when I see the behavior start dwindling and coming out in such things. Any thoughts or questions on that? Good, okay. So I use this one, the kids really like this one, but it's so true. Everybody, we always talk, you hear more probably, I think now, about everybody's truths, like, what is your truth? I think Oprah coined that phrase. And this is really important because I say, if you go into a room and say, ask 20 people a question, that's a very easy question, you're going to get 20 different answers. And that is because everybody's, how they form their decisions, or their voice of who they are, is individualized, and they come from who they are and where they've come from. And I think that we really need to respect this with children, because for them, their voice needs to be true and it needs to be meaningful, and we need to hear what they're saying, regardless if it sounds just like chatter. Okay. It's not just about the verbal talking. It's more about us hearing them, respecting them, making them feel the precious child that they truly are. Okay, so giving your child the voice. So again, in their past, they probably have never been heard. They've probably just been set aside, disregarded. And so this is going to be kind of a new thing for them. And they're not going to know how to give their voice, because the behaviors that they were doing before are very disruptive. And so we want to kind of get away from that. So if you ever have a behavior that you're trying to curb or to get rid of in a way, you have to have something to replace it. So when we're looking at giving a child voice, we first have to look at the behavior in which we're seeing that we maybe would like to kind of tweak a little bit. We got to look for the need behind the behavior, not just the behavior. And then we got to give the child options of being able to voice what they need without that behavior. So here's a couple examples, like a puppet, if you want to do puppet practice. A lot of play therapy where it comes into, like having even dolls, reenacting, feelings posters. They maybe not be able to say, I feel sad or I feel mad, but there's many different examples of feelings posters, of whether it's using Disney characters or just emojis of the faces. There's also an example of how does your engine run? Are you, if they're feeling depressed, is it it's putt putt, I can't get going. Or, with your engine, it's it's red, where it's when you're feeling just all crazy. So look, those are just a few of those. But really what you want to look at is the child themselves, the behavior in which that you want to change, and then the need behind the behavior, and then ways to be able to meet that need in the way that the child can communicate what they need. And once you're able to do that, the behavior does go away. Again, the behavior is just an outward of trying to communicate with you what they need. Okay, so here is children from places of fear. Again, I know I keep on reiterating these same concepts, that they've never had a caregiver respond to them, a safe one. Their histories are the basis of every behavior, that how they get their needs met. Their tools have become aggression, anger, behavior, some really bizarre behaviors you will see. And again, you truly just have to look at what the need is behind the behavior. Felt safety. Okay, so this is really important, I think, for children who have been for many years in a scenario in which they have not felt safe. where their levels of cortisol or stress levels have been through the roof for years and years and years, have never been able to kind of come down to our normal level. Just because they are safe does not mean they feel safe. If a child does not feel safe, now this isn't just about their behaving as if they feel safe, it's truly feeling safe in the brain. If they do not feel safe, they are unable to learn. They are unable to continue their development. And so this is really important. We will have a child that is, say, placed in foster care, and they're placed in a home that is safe, that it's warm, a caregiver, that their needs are getting met. And it will take easily 6 months for a child to truly get to where their brain, the chemistry, has lessened the cortisol levels, the stress levels, so that they actually feel safe. So this is extremely important. Okay, so now that we have this concept of, okay, they need to feel safe, how do we make children feel safe? How do we get them there? And I'm really going to kind of put this out there. So if anybody can put some comments of how examples of ways that you can make a child feel safe. And I don't know if any of the team is on there that can read those for me. Possibly, okay, so since I can't see any comments, oh, there we go. Do we got any examples listed? Okay, I'll provide an obvious one. So if a child comes from a home in which they don't feel safe, because maybe the caregiver was very explosive in their own behaviors, and then they lost their calm quickly, and yelled a lot, then the caregiver could just make sure that they're using a calm voice all the time, especially when things are working out well. So that's an example. Someone else want to give me an example?
Somebody said listening, which you mentioned, consistency and unconditional love. And then somebody else also said listening, being present. So a lot of the same themes there.
Consistency is important. We all love our schedules, okay? Children thrive on schedules. I know that they say that they don't, but they do. I know I really find myself getting anxious when I don't know what's to come. So needless to say, this COVID and this learning by the fly by the seat of our pants stuff causes me to anxiety. So my children make fun of me because they call me the binder queen, because that's a level of organization that I truly enjoy. And that just eases my anxiety. But I take ownership of that. I say, I know that this is why I feel this way. And so I get those feelings out by trying to get more organized. This is when my daughter just came in. Oh, thank you. I'm sorry, guys. Hold on one second. Yeah, where's Dad? Do you want to come sit over here? Yeah. Okay, come here. So she's in here. Sorry, my toddler just came in. So another way that to feel safe is, again, like we're talking about the scheduling, making sure that they know what's coming next. And it's this then comes with, even if there's a visual reminder, then reiterating the schedule, being able to kind of do the same thing again and again, so they kind of know. Okay. I'm so sorry. So you can say hi. Hopefully she doesn't touch anything. For me, I also like to have a calendar of knowing what's coming next, so that I'm prepared. And on here we go. Oh, there it goes. Here. Sorry about that. It's getting nap time. Okay, so sorry, she loses my train of thought. I apologize. Oh, the wonderful world of working from home. Feeling safe. Okay. So also feeling safe is that consistency of when they do like blow their top, or when their behaviors do become explosive, that they will continuously see us stay calm, stay there, and meet their needs. again, this is going to take a long time, much longer than a lot of individuals feel. So an example of that I've seen that I've worked with families is when they do international adoptions, when they have adopted a child maybe from an orphanage and they bring them back home, and they're like, I knew that the transition was going to be difficult, but I didn't realize it was going to be this difficult for this long. And really, we are having to change the biology of where they've come up for years in their past. And so it's just being very patient about meeting these children's needs again and again and again, so that the child knows that they are safe. So here's some of the examples. Again, they may know that they're safe, but if their brain does not, the primitive brain really truly gets that, they cannot move forward with development. So here we got the world predictability, daily rituals, transitions, levels of control, choices, their voice, and healthy touch, the high five, the massages, side hugs, handshakes, holding hands. So those are very important. Also, to kind of add to that, when a child gets to the point where they're unregulated, or they flip their lid, or they don't feel safe, what is super important to remember is that when that part of the brain is activated, so that's the primitive brain, that's the survival brain, when that is activated, or when it's stuck in that activation, a child understanding and learning is almost completely nonverbal, okay? So to give an example of this, have you ever been to the point where, you are verbally saying something like, I am calm, but the sound of your voice is not calm, your body language is not calm, okay? The child only hears in that moment your tone and your body language, okay? They do not hear verbally. So this is an example where parents who are long-winded with huge explanations too, or they try to use the verbally of trying to intervene, just don't, because the child literally cannot hear you. So this is when you're coming into just staying with them, to just sitting next to them, to being calm yourself, okay? Again, that is the most important thing, because they are not going to hear what is coming out of your mouth. They're only going to see how your body language is with them. Okay. So the fight, flight, or freeze, they feel out of control. There might be too much sensory, or they may not have enough sensory input. Do we have a comment? I'm sorry, I thought I heard something. No? Okay. So here's some examples of fight, flight, or freeze. We got the hitting, the kicking, the yelling, the flight, the running away, distracted behavior, changing the subject. And the freeze is like the melting down, whining, clinging, and then the zoning out. So I know that a lot of parents feel that the zoning out is their most preferred. What I will say, the zoning out is the most destructive. And that is, for me at least, the most concerning when I see children who disassociate with the situation, because they're just completely shutting down. And when they're shutting down like that, then they're actually not working through what's going on. And that exasperates the situation much worse. Where if we have the output of behaviors, then we know that they're actually working through what's going on. And so I really encourage and I get excited when I see the behaviors coming out, which then again, the parents just think I'm crazy. But that's just showing that they're feeling safe enough with you to be able to kind of work through what's going on internally. Any thoughts or comments to this?
I have to say this just looks very different, like you did in very many kids. This could just look like the kid that's zoning out when you're trying to have a conversation with them, but it's always about when they're in trouble.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, and again, even when I was talking about you're verbally trying to redirect or explain something, the best child, the most attentive child, the most brilliant child, you have about 2 minutes. So you need to figure out what you need to say in 2 minutes or less. So for me, I'm usually kind of to the point and moving on. My husband, on the other hand, gets lost in his own words, and he will spend much longer than that. And I can see my kids just zoning out. So it's really important to, whether it's a child who is in these fight, flight, or freeze, or even just your own child, when you're trying to redirect or rectify a behavior or a choice they made, you need to get to the point and move on, because they're not hearing you anymore. And how frustrating it is that when we're going on and on about something and then you ask them to repeat what you just said and they have no idea what you just said. And let's be honest, that's actually more on you than it is on the child. So just to know that they quit listening about 2 to 3 minutes. So everything you say after that, just don't even say, don't waste your breath. So I'm actually going to switch really quick to a screen. Oh, I'm sorry. Ginny, do you have a question or comment?
Oh, it's okay. I was just going to say, and it's always the dads that want to explain,
right?
Or the men Sunday school teachers that want the child to understand why they did what they did and why they shouldn't do that. Yeah, I always say to my husband, if you can't say it in 10 words or less, don't say it. Right.
And I know for us, I think sometimes the parents feel like, well, then we're just allowing them to behave this way, or, you know, or we're not teaching them and not being good parents. That's something we just need to kind of wash away, because if the child is not picking up what you're putting down, then they're not learning anyways. So if you need for yourself to feel like you're talking a whole story about something, then go outside and talk to the dog, because they're probably going to be more perceptive of it than the kids are. And it gets your needs met of, you know, voicing your thoughts on that, right? So I'm going to pause my screen. So I'm going to bring up another little video. This individual, his name is Josh Shipp. And I love this guy for many reasons, but he's, you know, he's a speaker, but he also grew up in foster care. I find him just amazing. I think he really kind of brings home importance of the work that we do, and he's entertaining. So I need to get some more water too. And so this will give someone else to kind of chip her in here. So give me just a second, because you're going to see a black screen while I switch over. Okay, guys. Okay, let's see. What are you seeing on your screen? Just make sure you see what I'm seeing. Do you see my PowerPoint, or do you see?
We see the video. You're good.
We can see the video.
Okay, just making sure. Okay, here we go.
I tried to kill myself with a bottle of pills. And the fact of the matter is I trusted no one. And looking back, I guess how could I? From the time my parents left me, to the time another foster kid raped me, to the time I was bullied so bad, I genuinely could not fathom a world where I could trust anybody. So fast forward, here I am, 14 years old, and entering my umpteenth foster home. I was a veteran at this whole sort of getting kicked out of one home, moved to the next. You meet these people who were like literally complete and total strangers 10 minutes ago, who are now apparently your mom and dad. You know, kids don't take candy from strangers, just move in with them. So I'm sitting in the van, in the driveway of this next home, and that's when I see Rodney. He's standing up there on the front porch, and immediately I notice, this is a large fella. He's 6'5", he's 350 pounds, and as a 14-year-old boy, I couldn't help but notice, when he's turned to the side like that, he's shaped like a lowercase b. It's amusing now, but in the moment it was tactical. Maybe that's how I could get kicked out of this home. Maybe I could get under his skin about his weight. So I move in with him. I'm being obnoxious. I'm being ungrateful. I'm being just downright rude and mean. I'm setting things on fire. And 3 years later, I can't shake this guy. Rodney won't kick me out. So I step up my game. I go to the local bank in town. I open up a checking account. I put about 90 bucks in there. Then I proceed to write $10,000 worth of checks. Obviously, checks bouncing one after the next after the next. One check that bounced was for my car insurance. I'm going down the road speeding, Stillwater, Oklahoma, 88 miles an hour. No car insurance, no driver's license. I get pulled over, handcuffed, thrown in the back of a cop car, and sent to jail. I call Rodney. Like, Rodney, I'm in Stillwater. I'm in jail. I'll tell you the whole thing when you get here. Can you please come bail me out tonight? He said, I will come bail you out, but not till tomorrow. Rodney frustratingly believes sometimes one of the most loving things you could do for a kid was allow them to sit in either the success of their wonderful choice or the stupidity of their foolish choice. Next morning, he comes, bails me out, exactly as promised. We have a long, very awkward car ride home. No one says anything. We get back to the house. He's like, we need to sit down and talk. And I knew this moment had finally come. So Rodney, his wife, sit me down to give me the talk I've had a dozen times. He looks in my eyes and says, son, you can keep causing problems. You can keep trying to mess up. You can keep pushing us away. You can keep trying to get us to kick you out of here, but you've got to get it through your thick head, son. We don't see you as a problem. We see you as an opportunity. And in that moment, all my skepticism came to the surface. And I thought, what a cheesy, stupid thing to say to a 17-year-old kid. But then I was overwhelmed with the reality that this guy actually meant it. He didn't see what I was, what was on the surface. The obnoxious kid, the ungrateful kid, the kid getting suspended. He saw what I could be. It was genuinely my turning point. Statistically, I am supposed to be dead, in jail, or homeless. But because of one caring adult. I'm not a statistic. Every kid is one caring adult away from being a success. Every child who winds up doing well has had at least one stable and committed relationship with a supportive adult. My friend and mentor, Reggie Joyner, taught me to think about it this way. In this jar are 936 marbles. Each one of these marbles represents a single week from the birth of a kid until that kid turns 18 years old. So if you know a 9-year-old, you've only got 468 marbles, or weeks, however you want to look at it, remaining. You know a 16-year-old? You got 104 marbles remaining. Right here, we are looking at time. In fact, you're looking at all the time or all of the weeks you have left to influence this kid, or this kid before they turn 18 and begin making critical life decisions without your presence. The difference between a statistic and a success story is you.
Okay, wow. So I definitely want some feedback on that video as I'm switching screens again. Does anybody have any thoughts about that? Any feelings that you feel when you saw that?
We have a couple people who've just commented on how powerful the video was and thanking you for sharing it.
Has any of, like Janine, have you ever seen Josh Ship or any of his videos? Has anybody ever watched any of his?
I haven't seen the Josh Ship videos, but we know Reggie Joyner and all of his resources and stuff. So that marble analogy is something that our volunteers are very familiar with. And I think that just like, even though I've seen it 1,000 times, like it's such an important refresher to know like how many marbles are left in that jar. And for me, like I'm not a parent, but I have all these kids that I don't have all of those weeks because like some kids are in split families and they only come like once or twice a month. So even looking at that jar, it's even like less for us at church too. So it's a really cool reminder.
And when with him, and what really kind of hones in is there's a lot of times where it is not the parent that's going to be that one caring adult, okay? It's not going to be the foster parent possibly. So don't take, when I watch that video, sometimes people be like, well, I don't have that much time with this child, or I only see him on the weekends, or, that's enough. That is enough. And with the research that's been done and from the knowledge that I know, is that success of a child in life, it is not about what is given to you or your wealth, any of those things. What it is, it's that one person, that one individual that gives you the opportunity for resilience. Sometimes there's actually a study that they did, I do believe it was in England, of success and happiness. And they took a group of children from a young age and from all, walks of life. And they had, children that were very wealthy, had everything they ever needed given to them, great education that was all paid for, to the very opposite end of it, where a child living in poverty, struggled to make ends meet, had to pay their way through college, and they followed them into adulthood. And what they had learned from this, as they looked into every part of these individuals growing up and in their lives and in their adult lives, is what made them be successful or not, what made them happy. And what they learned, it was those actually who had more conflict, more stress, more struggle, were happier and more successful, because they learned to then be resilient and to make things work. And all those individuals who went through that, every single one of them had a supportive environment. Now, whether it was their parents, whether it was an aunt and uncle, a teacher, a therapist, a coach, it didn't matter. It just mattered that they had one person. And so this is really important, that we need to kind of get embedded into ourselves, is that just because they're not our child does not lessen our responsibility for these children. Just because they're difficult does not. The more difficult, the more they need us. The more they push us away, the more we need to come in. And we can't lose sight of that with this. And to know that, that's the starfish on the beach where that child's throwing them in, and the adult was like, well, you're not really making a difference. And the child responded that for that one starfish, that she was. And that is exactly it, is that for that one child. And I know that for my work and for the choices that I make within my family, a lot of people, my family, my parents and my extended family, had a really hard time with the decisions that I made as I was choosing my career in child welfare. Their question, why would you choose a career in which 24/7, it's complete despair? It's the worst of the worst, the things that nobody wants to know about, nobody wants to hear about. And my answer to that was, well, if not me, then who? And if you look at it like that, then obviously then you're not right for this type of work. But the way I look at it is that then that is where I'm most needed, is to be for these children, because it is a situation in which many individuals cannot live a life in. And so those that can, we need to. If we feel called to help a child, whether it's, you know, in a career of child welfare, or whether it's just volunteering in your church to work with families that might be going through a rough time, you know, just as long as you're doing something and not just ignoring the problem, you can't put the blinders on. And that is something that you're going to learn as you work through and launch this new program, is that you're going to be seeing things that you may not know. And now that you know, you can't walk away from that responsibility of what you're called to do, regardless of how hard it is. If it's hard for you, can you imagine how hard it is on these families and these children? It's going to disrupt your comfort level, as well as it should. But you need to keep working towards helping these families. And then it kind of goes again to the fact of then when I decided to open up our home to foster. So then my parents were really, and a lot of those that were around me were just blown away of, you know, not only are you doing this for your career, but then now you're bringing it home. And the concerns about how that could affect my children and my family, and, you know, on and on and on. My response to that is if a child showed up at your doorstep and you had the chance to help this child, to save this child, could be life or death, what would you not do to do so? And that's literally what's going on at this point, where we need to step up and say, this may not be the easiest for me. This might not be, you know, the smooth life that I thought, but this is exactly where we need to be. There's nothing that I wouldn't give to save a child. An example of that was even when I started the agency that I run now. That was crazy. People thought that was insane to do what I did. But what I realized is that I was not able to help children the way that they needed to be helped in the situation that I was in. And in order to reach my full potential was to make that decision. And again, my parents came in of, you know, you are putting your financial stability on the line of you, as well as your children and your husband. My response was to that was, I would give every single cent that I owned to save a child. So if it was one child life that it made a difference of, it was worth every single cent that I had. And I do believe that every individual feels that way. And so we just need to make sure that we are, you know, being reminded when times do get a little bit tough and uncomfortable, that that's when we really need to kind of come in even stronger and harder for these kids. So with that being said, I'm going to go into some actual proactive strategies for that. Okay, so proactive. This means prior to the meltdown. This means setting the stage, the scene. So when you're trying to teach a child or communicate with a child, you need to be, when the child is calm, alert, and have their basic needs met, okay? Teaching wrapped in play. Children learn by play. Through and through. So it has to be in a fun, learning way. They have to know that they are giving that child a voice, practice giving care, receiving care, negotiating your needs, and then being the autonomous self. So having to know that that the child is an individual person, that is important. Engagement strategies. So the most important thing we're going to be focusing on here is safe and healthy ways to connect with children in a language that they understand. And when I say language, I'm not meaning the actual language. I'm meaning in a way that it's maybe not be verbally. So it could be just sitting next to them. It could be hugging them. It's kind of when you're looking at your child's love language, which is every child is different. So think about the child that wanted to go to the Golden Corral. So he was communicating that he felt loved by getting to go to the awesomest buffet ever. Cool, I am so down with that. So not only knowing what the child's love language is, but also identifying within yourself that where yours is, because sometimes a child's love language might be something that you're not really quite comfortable with. So if you're not a huge fan of the Golden Corral buffet, then you might have to meet that child's need through a different way. And so knowing that, this also kind of comes into play about your attachment styles. which are learned usually by the 12 months of age. So for me, I have a dismissive attachment style, which it sounds worse than what it is. But what that means is that my love language is for providing. So for me, I'm very much the caregiver in the sense of cooking and cleaning, getting them to where they need to go, making sure that all their schedules are ready. Like, so all of those doer type things, where my husband's love language is very more the hands-on, the loving, the playing, the sitting there. And so there's something wrong with one way or the other. It's just knowing to understand that, because, you know, for me, I'm not quite able to chill and sit and play hours long of, you know, the same game or playing outside football. Like, I get very easily distracted. And so that's part of my dismissive parenting style. And so identifying that within yourself so that you know where you're the best served is really good. And so my husband is really much better at being able to sit and playing Uno over card games, where I'm, you know, much more of like providing this amazing dinner for the kids, which they usually don't like anyways. So kind of doing that. Jeannie, do you have any thoughts or comments on that at all?
I was just laughing because I don't know why that I keep getting sent foster kids that have physical touch as their love language. And if you touch me one more time, I had one girl that used to love to rub ears. And I, please don't rub my ear. I just, you know, and this happens too in the nursery. You know, you might get a kid that just can't stop touching you when you're trying to tell a story, and just understanding that you're not going to change their love language just because it's not yours. You just have to figure out that maybe they can just hold your foot as you're talking, or, hey, you know, like I think someone said, Dan, I think, in the middle.
Right. And so, I mean, even when you were talking about the touching of the ear, the soft ear, that's funny because my husband likes to touch my kids' earlobes, drives him nuts. He tries to touch mine, I'm just, ugh. But makes me think of newborns or even the blankies for toddlers, where it's really soft and silky. Okay. So that's like a developmental need along with their love language. And so kind of like looking at those areas in which a child is expressing that they need, and knowing that each child is different and that we need to meet the child where they're at, regardless of how we are in ours. And so if, you know, if we cannot be present at that moment, we need to work harder, or if you're lucky as me that you have a partner who is able to do such things. And so that's really important to be knowledgeable about that. So we're talk a little bit about touch here. Touch is extremely important. I know that kids who have experienced touch in a very negative way, whether it's physical abuse or sexual abuse, that this can get really complicated. But touch is essential for survival. I'll give an example of what we know about this. I think our first learnings of this is the experiment that they had with the monkeys, where they had baby monkeys. They had two groups of them, and they had two mamas in these two groups. One mama was just a wire monkey that had the food, okay? And these are real life baby monkeys. And then the other mama was no food, but was this soft, like squishy fake monkey, okay? Mama monkey. And what they had learned from this is that the baby monkeys that were with the wire monkey that had the food, but was not soft and fuzzy, actually had much more significant developmental issues than the monkeys who had the soft furry monkey mommy, who had no food but was soft and furry. So what that taught us is that what we had thought was the most essential things for development, which were, we look at the hierarchy of needs of food and home. Actually, what was more important was the touch and the loving of a caregiver. And so this is a really good example of why we still need to have that healthy touch. if we're working with kids whose touch in their past has not been always a good thing for them, then it's that learning that to teach them about their self-safety and making them feel safe. And when you're doing so, maybe doing like the high five, the shoulder bump, elbows, something like along those lines as you work towards getting it so that you actually can hug them and maybe hold their hand again. With this said too with touch is that you might see children who unhealthy touch is all they know. And an example of this more on the extreme end of children who have been sexually abused, they have been taught that that is what love is. They have been taught that this is how they get attention, and they essentially feel that that's appropriate. So these children will reenact with other adults what has happened to them. And so knowing their history is important, because the last thing you want to do is to react in a way that pushes them away or shames them. So let's see, for an example, with that, I've known that we've had placements where the young girl had been sexually abused. And so her go-to, and when any man came into the home, was to instantly get on the lap and straddle, or possibly grind on the male's lap. And so that was something that we had to obviously be prepared for, and to be able to redirect in a way that wasn't shaming the young girl, as we teach her new ways to show affection. But it's really important to make sure that you're not shaming with that. And this is, again, to the children who have very aggressive behaviors that's taught. And so we want to make sure that we're providing them redirection when they might kind of get a little bit more rough than we would like. Eye contact. So this is extremely important, but make sure that you are engaging the child, because this could be very difficult for children in hard places. But you want to be loving and playful, and a way that are those eyes pink, which we all know they're not pink, but then to get engaged of that silliness of like, no, they're brown. And so it's the eye contact and making sure that the children feel seen. Voice quality is super important. So making sure that you don't get into that stern, frustrated. You want to have the tone, the volume, like that cadence, like the singy song, the fun, because then the kids, they will lower their barriers and be more receptive to what's going on. As soon as you as an adult gets heightened in your frustration, they feel and see that and hear that, and they will as well. Behavior matching. So this is important too. So when a child, in certain examples, is having behaviors that they may not understand of what they're doing or how it looks like. And so being able to behavior match sometimes will get them to understand what it looks like for what they're doing. And so for an example of this with my own biological child, when she learned to whine, we tried everything to get her to stop, and it wasn't working. And so I started talking in that whining tone, and the look of disgust on her face instantly was priceless. She was like, oh, why are you talking like that? I'm like, because that is how you sound. And that actually worked. We nipped it in the bud. Not saying that would work for every child, but that's just an example of knowing. And so, and also what behavior matching does too, is that it shows that you are seeing and hearing the child. Playful interaction. This is so important. If anything else you take away, playful interaction, it's really important. It brings their level down. This is how they learn. And so, especially if you're doing it in the sense where the child is leading and you're following, it's really important. We're going to be talking about some choices, compromises, and a life term. So I know we're kind of getting like half hour here, but so when we're talking about with the children and teaching, and as we're reading the scripture I put up here, we learn from our parents, right? So whether this, in some instances, maybe not be the proper behavior, We need to know that coming into working with children is that we have to behave in the way that we want our children to behave. And so loving a child without any boundaries, being vulnerable. We're asking a child to be vulnerable for us and to trust us, which we need to be able to show them that we are that as well. And these are some things that maybe a lot of adults have difficulty feeling comfortable being. But what I would say is owning when you might have made a mistake, or allowing a child to see you when you're at your weakness, shows that you are human, and it helps them to lessen their guard of when they have their walls up. Okay, so we're going to kind of go into the willful disobedience. This is something that I see quite often with families where they're looking at behaviors as they're just purposely trying to get your gears grinding. And if you're looking at behavior this way, it turns into power struggles. What I'm going to say is, with power struggles, there is no positive end to it, okay? Because all you're doing is adding on to the situation and upping the frustration, and nothing is ever resolved, okay? All you're going to get then is more social problems, resistance. It's going to affect your relationship. The number one indicator of behavior is having a relationship with that child and that connection with that child. It is not putting more rules in. That's not going to work. And so when you get into this power struggle, children have way more time on their hands than we do, okay? And they will outlast you. Especially toddlers will outlast you. So when you see yourself coming into this power struggle, you need to learn to walk away as the adult. Don't even engage in a power struggle. If you see yourself coming into one, it's never going to end well. So you just need to walk away. So here is the way children behave as a reflection of. So a lot of times we're looking at willful disobedience. We're looking at that behavior as they're trying to upset us, that they're purposely ignoring us. Did they hear what we said? And once we start going down that path, it's a very destructive path. Now, if we start looking at a survival behavior as if a behavior is because of their past, because of their trauma history that has affected their brain development, their wiring. Are they tired? Have they had anything to eat? Are they thirsty? Did something happen earlier today that we're not aware of that may have caused them to react the way they did, okay? Don't let fear get in the way of raising your child with joy and understanding. So we need to begin to look at behaviors in a way that is a different mindset, okay? To really try to find what's behind them and making sure that we're meeting all of their needs prior to trying to reduce the behavior that's difficult, okay? So these are my two older ones, but this is quite a few years ago. What I love about this picture is that, as you can see, they're having milkshakes, and as you can see, my son probably has had already way too much sugar by the look on his face. But yes, so we were talking about hydration here. It is so extremely important that our children are getting enough fluid in their body, because they are not. They are especially do not when they're in school. And so making sure they're drinking whatever it is that gets them hydrated. So I drink a ton of water, but as a child, I never did, because I didn't like water. So if it has to be lemonade watered down, does it have to be Gatorade? You just need to make sure that they're hydrated. And I'll show, I have a next slide, I'll show you how we know. Blood sugar, okay? This is super important too. We all get hangry, okay? More, I think, men do than women. But hangry is a real deal. It's a real thing. So making sure that they're getting snacks. And I know that they're getting better at schools, but even at home learning that we're all doing, they need to be having snacks, and healthy snacks, at least every 2 hours, if not more. We need to let snacking happen as much as they need, and making sure that we're using healthy snacks. And sensory needs. So this is another area that I feel that schools can sometimes be lacking. They need to get their wiggles out, okay? We can't expect a child to be sitting at a desk paying attention for hours on end without having to get up and get the wiggles, okay? So we need to make sure that we're allowing them and providing an environment in which this is happening. So at home learning, okay, That could be making sure that we are going outside for a recess. And now this is also good for us adults that we need to be reminded to do so. This could be great for a chance for us to connect with our children and grow our relationship. And maybe a church setting. This might be something that we need to make sure that we're doing really fun things as we're interacting and part of our curriculum. I actually have at home one of those, the parachutes, okay? I loved the parachute when I was a child, so I bought some for my kids. And I take it with me on any family vacation that we do when I know I'm gonna be around a lot of kids. That's awesome, kids love those. So looking into those type of things where we can get them really going. This also helps with the regulation because you're then getting their blood pumping, they're getting their gears are grooving, and then when we're done and ready to kind of go back to sit back down again, you're teaching them how to kind of get their body back down and their heart rate lower, which is exactly what regulation is. So they're the co-regulation, self-regulation. Okay.
And I think this falls a little bit, Jessica, and I think this falls a little bit too with the home learning right now, is just being honest with the teachers too. And saying, hey, I know my son, he's starting to get wiggly up there. I can see him. He's not sitting still. And telling the teacher, it's okay. He's going to stand up and still be in front of the computer, but he's going to stand. A lot of teachers are having a hard time thinking if the kid's not sitting in front of the monitor, he's not learning. And the thing is, some of our kids, most of us don't learn that way. At work, in the office, I'm sure you are not sitting with your head perfectly still in the middle of the monitor for 45 minutes staring at a class. You're typing away, you're looking at your phone, you're playing with a notepad, your pen is jiggling, your foot is going. And that's the same with our kids. Rubber band around the two front chair legs helps them bounce their legs up and down. A bouncy ball to sit on, chewing gum. We're not allowed that at school, but we're allowed that at home. Let them chew gum. Something that, because it is a long time to be very still in front of a computer screen, and just being honest that with the teacher, they need this. Because they're not sitting, and don't start giant fights about it. If they're not going to sit, go do something, come back, tell the teacher, because again, I think right now we just need to be honest. And they know. I mean, they've normally taught these kids, but they didn't make them all sit in one spot at school. They were moving every 10 minutes to go to music, to art, to the reading corner, to the math corner, to free choice. They weren't sitting for 40 minutes very still. So, I think it's very hard right now.
And I think what's really important that you were brought up with that too, that jumped out, is that you're advocating for your child, okay? Because when you do that, your child sees that you see them, you value them, and that you're willing to advocate for what they need. And that is so important for a child to understand. And, even like this kind of goes into this all trying to figure out how things are going to happen. And it's the big old saying of choose your battles. I mean, really, that is such, like, probably anything that my grandparents ever told me is choosing your battles. That's so important, because if you're picking at every little thing, nothing matters then to a child. And where, if you let a lot of things go, if it's not going to kill them, that's kind of how I am. If it's not going to kill them, okay, fine. And so that when you do choose something that's really important to you, they realize that this is something important that they need to pay attention on. And it kind of goes with the school, if they can't sit still and they need a break, they're not learning anyway, so give them a break. And it just loving them regardless. And again, making sure that they see that they're being heard and felt and understood. So the hydration solutions, I hope not to kind of gross anybody out, but this is really a way to teach a child whether they're thirsty or not. Because by the time that you feel thirsty, the damage has already been done at that point. So you are already dehydrated, and your loss of your cognitive function has already been lessened. So looking at the different yellow colors, as you can assume that will show a child if they need to get some more water with them or not. And this is also something too where, a lot of times we wake up in the morning and we're like, whoa. And so making sure that we're keeping them very hydrated. We're talking again about the eating healthy often, a snack timer, allowing the child to have voice and choice with a grocery list, having them pick out their snacks. This is even more so important for children who have been severely deprived of food. A brain will never forget hunger. So if you have food hoarding, which is very common for children who have been neglected, know that's very normal behavior, and it does lessen it when their body begins, their brain begins to learn that they will have snacks anytime they need it. So now we're going to be talking about sharing power, which I feel again is something that I've known that is difficult for certain parents to share power, but this is so very important. Sharing power with children, and let me be very clear that it's not allowing them to make all the decisions. That is not what I'm saying. I'm saying that you need to share it, because sharing power has a few things here. Children as adults, as I do, crave control, because when you have control, at least for me, it lessens my anxiety, because then I can plan, I can get things done where I need to get done. And so that helps me to kind of prepare. It goes for children as well. Also, with children who have been from hard places, they've never had any. They do not know what's going to happen next. They do not know if they're going to have food, if they're going to have a place to live, if they're going to school, who's going to take care of them, where they're going. And so by being able to share power with a child that's been through some of those things, it gives them a chance to give their voice, as well as builds the trust with the caregiver. Make sure, the parent is still in charge, okay, but it also helps child practice decision-making skills, which is very lacking as well. And super important that safe people listen to me, that we value their voice, and we value what their input is, especially when it comes to decisions being made about them. So we want to make sure that any choices that are being made are outcomes that the parent and child will be healthy with, okay? So happy with. So when you're putting out a choice, make sure it's something that you can live with, okay? So if there's certain things that you know ahead of time that you would not be comfortable with, don't put it as an option. So an example for maybe healthy snacks, okay? Or snacks in general. If you're saying, okay, you can pick your snack, you need to put out the choices that you're okay with them picking. If you just say you can pick out your snack, but then you don't put any regulation on that, and they pick out the sucker because you didn't eliminate that choice, then you're being counterproductive, because then you're taking away the choice you just gave them, which is going to cause frustration. And so this is kind of the things when you're looking at too, of like choosing your picking your battles, choosing your battles with children, is that pretty much allowing them to do things that don't drive you absolutely insane, but knowing that ahead of time of what that's going to be, and don't set up something that could be chosen that you're not going to be able to deal with. Sometimes with certain families, a child always wants to pick out their own outfits. And so for me as a parent, I could care less what a child wears. It never bothered me. So whether it's their pajamas or some crazy costume, or wearing the same thing for the umpteenth day in a row, that didn't bother me. Although I know that some parents, that would really not be acceptable. So you wouldn't just give them the free-for-all picking out what they want if that's something that you were not comfortable with. Okay. Compromise. So this is it's a very specific life lesson that I think that even lots of adults need help with compromise sometimes. So this is teaching your child about not really giving in, but being able to negotiate and making sure that both parties are being heard, and respecting each other's thoughts and feelings and wants, and finding something that's in the middle. And so teaching a child compromise is something that teaches a child social skills, and it helps to move the behavior forward. And so that you're not stuck in just like, you said I couldn't have that, and then they get fixated in not having that one particular thing, where with a compromise, you're moving forward, you're not fixating on that, and kind of giving that child another option to move forward. So the social skills, negotiation, words have power. And here's the ideal response. And this is something from a TBRI standpoint, Karen Purvis. So this is something when I'm looking at curbing behaviors, it's really important to think about the ideal response. It's immediate, it's direct, efficient, action-based, and leveled at the behavior, not the child. So an example I like to use for this is, say for me, I'm in the kitchen and I'm cooking dinner, so I'm busy and I can't walk away from the stove, but my 2 children are physically being aggressive with each other and are beating on each other. Okay, I can hear the screaming and the carrying on. So what I would do is, because I'm in the kitchen, I'm busy and I don't want to burn dinner, I am then going to yell from the kitchen to the children that are in the other room to knock it off. And guess what? They continue to do it, right? Because I needed to stop what I was doing, go into the room in which they're at, look at them both direct, and be very clear of what I want them to do and not do. Okay, so it would be, instead of just saying knock it off from the kitchen, it would be coming to them, looking them in the eyes, stopping what they're doing, saying, you know, Jack, I need you to quit banging your sister in the head with the tambourine. And so I'm going to have to need you to come sit in the kitchen with me, and you could pick up your tablet and work on maybe some of your homework or one of those games you like. And then I would look at my daughter and essentially kind of give her the same thing where we're actually directing them to something else, okay? And then we're talking about level at the behavior and not the child. That we're leveling at quit hitting your sister in the head with the tambourine, okay? Not that you're a terrible kid, why don't you understand how to keep your hands to yourself, okay, da-da-da-da-da. So making sure that it's about the behavior and not about the child. So you don't want to shame the child, you want to identify the behavior that you're trying to curb at that moment. So then the other, we're talking about being connected, content, and the changed behavior. They're all connected to each other. So immediate, within 3 seconds, okay? Do not try to address something that happened earlier in the day. Now this kind of comes into play too with situations where there might be an incident at school, okay? Now I don't want you to ignore things that happen at school, but if you're trying to really connect with a child about something that happened to try to redirect that behavior, you're not going to be able to do it like the way it was in the moment that it actually happened. So again, it's immediate right as it happens, and that's because that's when the better learning is going to occur. So direct, stay engaged, connected on the child's level, eye contact. So don't be standing above a child looking down at them, towering over them. That's not going to work. Engage, connected. So this might even be like, you know, so say for the beating of the tambourine on the head, it's touching the child's shoulder to get their attention, to say, hey, buddy, you know, that's one of the ways that you can engage them. Use only amount of structure necessary. Nip it in the bud, move on. Do not keep going on and on about it and dragging it out. No, just nip it in the bud, stop it, move on, okay? Don't bring it up, you know, later that night. Don't bring it up the next day. You just, that's it, move on, done. So action-based, so it could be a redo if they're doing something that was appropriate. Maybe they barked an order at you saying, Mom, give me this. You could say, well, okay, let's try that with a little bit more respect. How about you say, excuse me, Mom, if you could pass me the ketchup, please. And then have them re-say that same response or the same request in a better way. So you are giving them a second chance. You're also teaching them in ways that they may not know how to verbalize their needs. Make sure it's leveled again at the behavior and not the child. So making, you know, a lot of children, when as adults do too, when we screw up, we don't need to be reminded of it, right? We don't need to feel ashamed and embarrassed. So why in the world do we as adults and as parents do that to our children time and time again? It does not work. I know for me as a child, that was a strategy my father used quite a bit that was very harmful for me. And I have caught myself doing it because it's a learned type of behavior even as adults. And I've had to catch myself because all you're doing is making that child feel terrible about themselves, okay? This also kind of goes into the thing about asking questions that you already know the answer to, okay? So if you know that there was an instance at school that happened and you go pick up your kid from school and he hops in the car and you already talked to the teacher, do not begin your convo with the kid as, hey, so anything happened at school today? Okay. You were setting them up to lie to you because they're not going to want to go back to a behavior that they may be embarrassed about, that they know they're going to get in trouble for. So then don't set them up to do so. Okay. This is a very hard habit to break. So making sure that you're looking at the behavior and not the child. We don't want to be shaming, and making sure that we're, as much as we are possibly like redirecting, that we're also building them up as we go. So every negative comment that a child receives, you need to give them 15 to 20 positive things to actually set that bar back. Okay, so make sure we're setting the bar in the way for expectations for behavior. So again, we were talking about maybe older children, like chronological age, maybe behaving in a way that is much younger than them, and that's okay. So we need to understand their history and their circumstances and set the bar for where they're at, not where we think they should be. That's super important. Some examples, that's my little buddy when he was just a little buddy, with a little face. Time in versus time out. So again, when a child needs to calm down, making sure that you're staying with them and not pushing them further away. So bring child closer versus sending away. Resolution versus consequences. Consequences don't work. We've learned that from many, many, many years of research. They don't work. A child does not think before they make a decision whether or not what the consequences are going to be. An adult doesn't do that. A criminal does not think that way. So we need to make sure that we're not focusing on the consequences. We need to be looking at the behavior and what the need is behind it. And so if we're meeting the need, the behavior goes away. Problem solving versus lectures. Again, do not drone on. They're not going to be listening to you. Let's look at the behavior. Let's take it piece by piece and figure out how we're going to do it differently. Make sure you're the child's advocate. You are on their side. You are their team. You are their number one. They need to know that you're going to be by their side no matter what, and that you're going to fight for them for no matter what. That makes it's really hard for children to get to that point because they've never had that person in their corner. And most importantly, focus on the child's preciousness and not their failures. Okay, so we're going to transition real quick because I want to show this real quick video about adolescents and teens that I just find to be super amazing. So as I switch screens for that, I know I don't want to run out of time before I show it. Do any of you want to hop on anything as I look for this video? That would be cool.
Yeah, we just had a question for Margaret. What is the best response when your child is mean or hurtful to another child?
Okay.
I don't know if she's talking about from a kid that comes from a hard place or not. But I guess for all kids, do you want to answer that one, Jessica?
So this is what I say all the time to not only children, but to adults. Anger and those like the feeling of anger and the outward behavior of anger, which would be like physically hurting another child or being mean, those stem from hurt. Okay. So if a child is being mean, so say your kid is being mean to another child, it is because your child at that moment was either feeling left out, not included. There's something going on maybe with something that happened earlier. So it's, obviously you don't want to allow, like your child to be a bully or be mean to other children. But so you need to redirect and make them understand that that's not acceptable behavior, but at the same time, then giving them the tools of whatever they were trying to communicate with that child. So if they were being mean to a kid because they felt that they were, being left out, that you can say, give them verbal ways of being able to say like, it hurt my feelings when you didn't pick me in kickball. and being able to give those the ways to communicate their needs without having to use that physical aggression, but then also looking at why the child's bucket might be empty and why they might be feeling a little bit more sensitive than normal, and trying to fill their bucket so that they aren't that sensitive and have to be reactive. Does that make sense?
Yep, that's exactly what I was going to say.
Oh, good, good.
I'll let you get your video set up, and then we'll have it. Then we have another question. But
Okay. All right. So for this talks a little bit more about teenage years and adolescence. And I've been more focusing on it now as my child is getting older. My daughter is driver's editing and all that good stuff. And children, as we know, have a tendency to sometimes make some really poor decisions. Can you guys see this, not the PowerPoint, but the screen?
Yep, we can.
You can, okay. And so quite often when we're looking at teenagers, we always make this assumption about why they're making the decisions that they're making. And this kind of goes back to the concept of there's actually biological reasons why they make bad choices and push boundaries and try to find, they're trying to find, who they are. And so this video hits on it a little bit. And again, it's looking kind of more at what's going on within the child than looking at the behavior itself. Oops, wrong one. Hold on 1 second. The wrong one went. Let me go back. All right, of course. Give me 1 second again, my apologies.
It's not easy being a teenager.
All right,
There's the angst, the emotions, the raging hormones. And although hormones do play a big role in puberty, the brain is going through a lot of changes too. Neuroscientists are learning that some of the most puzzling teenage behavior may actually have some real benefits. Legally, you're considered an adult when you turn 18. But from the neuroscience perspective, your brain is really still developing.
And the current literature suggests that it's about around age 25 or so is when the brain finishes the period of adolescence.
This is Dr. Adriana Galvin, and she runs the Developmental Neuroscience Lab at UCLA. The brain develops from the back to the front, so the prefrontal cortex is the last region to fully develop.
The prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain you need to make good decisions, to think about the future, think about consequences.
You can kind of think of it like the Spock of the brain, logical, calm, and collected. And then deeper in the brain, there are these emotional systems like the limbic system that are more interested in immediate gratification. They're sort of like Captain Kirk, a risk taker, and a bit emotional. During the teenage years, the limbic system develops really quickly, and the prefrontal cortex is trying to catch up. Eventually, as individuals become adults, the prefrontal cortex will increasingly have more influence over behavior than the impulsive part of the brain. So, without a fully developed prefrontal cortex, you can kind of see why teens might be more impulsive or just worry less about future consequences. Another brain region that's really active during adolescence is this thing called the striatum, and it's a key part of the brain's reward system. Let's say you find 20 bucks on the street, or someone gives you a cookie. The striatum goes off, and it releases dopamine into the brain. Adriana's lab discovered that the teenage brain is super sensitive to different rewards like sugar and money, way more than in the brains of adults and children. And all this activity in the brain's reward center, it may actually serve a purpose.
We asked teenagers to come to the lab and we scanned their brains while they performed a learning task. They were shown a picture of a butterfly and 2 flowers, and they were asked to guess which flower the butterfly would land on.
After each guess, they were given feedback. When the teens got it right, their striatum would get really active.
They would learn over time that the butterfly preferred one flower over the other. And everybody learned this task. But what we found is that the adolescents learned it more quickly than adults and with greater accuracy.
So having this reward center that's hyper-responsive to feedback actually helps teenagers learn from their environment. But this same region of the brain is also connected to risk-taking. Data from Adriana's lab suggests that teens with a more reactive striatum are more likely to engage in risky behavior and to enjoy it.
Rather than ask how you keep your teenager from taking risks, because we know the brain is really oriented towards risk during this time, it's better to ask, how do I provide opportunities for healthy risks?
Like trying out for the school play, even if you've never acted before, or asking someone out on a date. Those are real risks to a teenager, but they're not the kind of risks that parents typically worry about.
It makes sense from an evolutionary perspective that there's a time in life when teenagers want to become more independent, seek out new opportunities. In the animal world, this would translate into looking for new food resources or foraging behavior. And in teenagers, it often manifests as risk-taking behavior and simply moving away from the family unit.
Teenagers are going to make mistakes, but they've got this brain that's encouraging them to learn and explore and push boundaries.
So adolescence is a really special time, and I think we don't appreciate enough their energy and their ability to lead and to motivate, and how excitable they find life in a way that we maybe we don't later in life.
Our brains keep changing throughout our lives, and researchers at UC Berkeley are learning that if you give people a little bit of power, it can have a big effect on the brain. Learn more by watching our video here, and be sure to subscribe for more Figure 1.
Okay, so any thoughts on that video? As I go back to the screen.
I think it can also account for my husband's brain, not only my child's teenager's brain.
Right, right. Oh, because I know when I was growing up, so it was me and my sister, and two girls, which nowadays it's there's usually many more siblings in a household. But my dad would always say like our hormones and out of control and all that stuff. But now that we're seeing is that that's not necessarily it. And when we look at how the brain is working, what I take away from that is just how exciting and awesome that we can set up our kids for success. And being able to learn more about that gives us more ways in which to make them grow in healthier ways. We know that children are going to be making maybe bad decisions, right? So let's set them up where we have the boundaries in which that those aren't going to have like lifelong complications to some of those decisions. And also, when you talk about the lighting of the brain, about the cookie or the money, taking that and with the knowledge of that. So once again, we're going back to positive reinforcement that consequences don't work. But if we can get that thing to light up, that does work. So let's take that information and then to fuel these children to take like healthy risks, to feel better about themselves, so let's constantly praise them and give them the reward that's going to teach them to step out of their box. I think for all of us as parents, we want our kids to feel confident within themselves. And I feel that that's something right now with the kids that is really struggling. And that's a way that they can, as they grow into adults, be able to advocate for themselves. And so that's our job as parents, to kind of come in and to really activate that part of the mind and to teach them to love themselves.
And
so
I think
know
this kind of comes in, sorry, Jessica, it kind of comes into what Margaret was saying too about if your child is hurt somebody else's feelings or is being mean. She was asking, should the child say anything to the child that was hurt, like making them apologize for their behavior kind of thing.
Right. And so at the time, so we're going to kind of look back at the ideal, like that framework we said. So if your children there, you're sitting right there and your child, you see your child hit that other child, you're going to intervene immediately. And you're going to, say at that moment, like it's not appropriate to hit the child, with, say he hit him with the play hammer, okay, you know, you need to apologize for doing so, because they need to have that action, you know, that's going to after their behavior. But we want to make sure that the focus isn't on that, then the apology excuses the behavior, because I think sometimes even as adults, we will apologize for doing something, but we really don't mean the apology. We're just saying it because we're told to say it, because we were taught to say it, but it doesn't make the behavior in itself like any better if we do it again, right? But we still need to apologize, because that's kind of being about the, you know, like social cues and acceptable ways. But then it kind of, then at that point, so the child apologizes for the behavior. But then even if, depending on the age and what was going on and why the child got upset, even using that moment, if you know what it is, of maybe it's because they wanted the toy that the child had, is saying, having your child, you know, express that need to the other child and saying, you know, I'm sorry I hit you. I got just frustrated because you had the toy that I wanted to play with, right? I guess it depends on the age and what was going on, because then you're using that moment as kind of a learning moment where you're teaching the child to verbalize his needs, but then you're also hopefully, you know, working with a child that got hurt to see that maybe they have some kind of negotiation skills in the interaction that was going on. Does that kind of make sense?
And I think too, going back to how old our kid is emotionally, socially, sometimes you have to go back a little. If you've got a 9-year-old that's still saying mean things and won't apologize, and it just makes the situation worse by making that child apologize, you might need to go back. You might need to go back 6 steps, and they might need to touch that kid on the shoulder, and that's their way of saying sorry. I've even had little kids as young as 3 do the sign language, I don't even remember it now, but I'm sorry, or write them a note, I'm sorry. Maybe you need to go back 3 steps because they don't know how to do that, I'm sorry.
Or they can't get to that level at that moment.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. So I still think there's got to be something, they do, so that that person can see that they, not necessarily for that child, but for themselves, that they can see that they're sorry about it. But it doesn't have to be an I'm sorry, kind of verbally.
Right. And you also want to make sure that we're not like shaming the child too, which I think kind of that question kind of came from as well, of, like, as I think we all know when we were growing up, like your parents would like march you into whoever you wronged and have you face them face on. And it's almost like that very shameful environment, which is not helpful. But I think that having a child take responsibility and how they can and where they're at is important to teaching the social skills. Any other questions that we have?
I have not seen anything more. I don't know if Carly has or anything.
Okay. So
I have one. Someone texted me, and they their question was that their child actually attaches to adults too quickly. Mm-hmm. So in terms of like bonding and attachment, it's kind of like that extreme opposite. So right. They were asking for any advice.
So when a child does bonding. Yeah, they're actually not attaching. That's like that desperate clinging, I guess, to it. So they may appear to be attaching, but it's attention-seeking behavior. So it's like the stranger danger.
Hugging the FedEx man as he comes up the driveway. That was my foster daughter's.
Right. So I know, like for my youngest daughter, my toddler, and I know it's the age for her too. She is friendly to a fault, we call her. We have actually a Bernstein Bear book that we read quite often, about a brother had this radio control job that, and he talks to a stranger. So that is my toddler right now. And I think for her, it's because she has been in a very safe and secure environment that she does not identify the stranger danger as a possibility because it's not in her realm of thinking. Okay. But she doesn't like sit on their lap or anything. She just talks to anybody. And as soon as they get so excited because she's so cute and they get a positive reaction, then it kind of fuels that interaction with strangers. And so it's safe and okay right now. But if we're kind of talking about at another level where I've had multiple placements where the children will literally go with whoever. They will literally sit on anybody's lap. We'll be at a restaurant and they'll just go in the waiting area and sit on some strange woman's lap, right? And this comes from the fact that they have not securely attached to anybody, that they are so desperate for that relationship and that attention that they are seeking it out in any which way possible that they can get it. This also could be because of a history of being passed off to multiple caregivers. And so they just don't know what that secure attachment looks like. And this is just a learned behavior of how to get attention. But I guess those are just kind of some examples. And it's one of the thing of it is they might be just a very social child too. So I guess if there's an example of what their interpretation of their attaching to people looks like in a context wise, could be more helpful to kind of pin it down.
And I think that just kind of, if you're seeing a lot of that behavior, I think it is that they just haven't attached to somebody yet. I found that with my foster kids, is that they want, because they were new in my home and they hadn't attached to me or my husband yet, that they were looking for that attachment. So they were going to anybody and everybody, and anybody at church was their best friend. And they would say, can I go over to, Mr. Ted's house? Because, I like him. And you're like, you've met him twice, So maybe that just you might need to look at, are you being intentional about spending a lot of time with that child? Are you spending your 3 minutes or hour with that child a day doing something with them? Are they walking the dog with you every night alone? Is there something that you can do to make them attached to somebody? And I just found once that happened in my household with my 15 foster kids, then they didn't want to get the attention from other people. Because they had what they needed, they were fulfilled at home. They then didn't hug the FedEx man anymore.
Right. And so that's a really good examples. And two, depending on what the attachment behavior of this child looks like, they could be portraying what they see as what adults like to see. So if they're maybe taking the cues from the adults that they're attaching to, or the behaviors that perceive this attachment behavior as positive. And so it's kind of, it's like, you smile at a person, the person smiles back. So depending, so with my daughter, she's a toddler. And so she'll go up to talk to other adults, and then they respond very positively. And so they kind of get that interaction. So if your child is having hugging other adults and the other adults are responding very positively to that might also be fueling some of these behaviors, because then she's interpreting that's what she's supposed to be doing, because the adults are the interaction is so positive. So I know that it's time. Again, I want to thank everybody for being so patient with this learning curve of the technology. I will say, for me personally, the Zoom training, I am such a person that needs to be around people, that the fact that I cannot see everybody has been very much difficult for me to do this. So I apologize if that was obvious. I know we covered a ton of information, which I was worried that because I didn't have the interaction that I so rely on when I do trainings in the past, that I might have filled the PowerPoint with too much, because I was afraid that we weren't going to have enough to fill the time. And so I just want to thank everybody for joining and inviting me, and also let you know that I did let the staff know that they have my email. And if there's any questions, any type of follow-up or different scenarios, or if you want to learn more, feel free to shoot me an email, and I can assist you in sending you in the right direction or giving you some more resources. But I'm always around, and I love hearing from individuals that I've done trainings with. So I appreciate you a lot.
Thank you, Jessica and Janine. I know you just touched on a lot of what I was going to cover too, but again, just to reiterate, if you guys have any other questions that maybe didn't pop into your head yet, be sure to reach out to myself or Alicia, and then we can get you guys in touch with Jessica and Janine. Thank you so much again for your guys' time. I know we just scratched the surface of this. I know that there's still so much more to learn and be aware of, but I'm just thankful that everybody just committed 3 hours of their Saturday to learn more about this so we can impact kids and families better. So thank you again, Jessica and Janine. It was so nice to be on this with you guys. You guys are now Zoom professionals. You did great, so no worries there. Again, if you guys have any other questions, make sure to let us know. But with that, I will let you guys continue on with your Saturday.
Great. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Buddy.